Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Academy Anonymous podcast, where we're talking all about the Oscars, Oscar Race 2026. I'm your co-host, Joseph.
And I'm your other co-host, Jules.
Thank you for joining us. And as always, make sure to follow us online. We're on Twitter at Academy Anon. That's ANON. And visit us on our website. That's framesandflicker.com. You can catch up with a bunch of interesting coverage there. And of course, Oscar predictions. We have brand new Oscar predictions reflecting everything that's happened sort of at the end of September and the opening of October. And so a lot of interesting changes have been made. And so those are updated for you to take a look at. And we also have that information available on the cover art. That's our Twitter handle at Academy Anon, and our website, framesandflicker.com. You can also find links to both in the show notes for this episode.
Right. And we're constantly updating our Oscar predictions, especially in these sort of tumultuous months of October, November, December. So if you go on the website, you'll see frequent updates. We're trying to always, take stock of how the weather is changing in this race. And as we all know, weather changes pretty fast week to week. So look out for that. I thought that on this episode, we could focus on several films that have already come out for the general public consumption, and discuss what our takeaways were from the films that we just saw along with everyone else. Also discuss some of the films that have underperformed as of late and have sort of changed the Oscar race to some degree.
Right.
And then talk about the New York Film Festival, which just wrapped up, and with a very important screening that we're going to spend some time evaluating, taking apart. And then a couple last tidbits at the very end of the show.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. So where do you want to start?
So why don't we start with, you and I got a chance to see A House of Dynamite finally last week. It's going to be on streaming this week. I'm not sure exactly what day. Is it Friday or Thursday? It came out to theaters and select theaters, the last couple of weeks, I believe.
Right.
We got a chance to see it last week. So what did you think?
I think it's a great place to start because I think if you catch up with our Oscar predictions, one of the most significant changes we've made is sort of where A House of Dynamite falls for a bunch of races. I think we had it pegged pretty high in the places that were included. For example, a film editing, original screenplay, best picture, maybe not in, the top 5 for best picture, but we felt very confident. It was spot number 6. So we felt very confident. At one point we were discussing, can you have Chloe Zhao in there and Catherine Bigelow in for director? If not, maybe Catherine Bigelow makes more sense because she hadn't been nominated so recently.
Right. And post-Venice, I think we were really high on this idea that even, before, if you remember our previous episodes, we were already discussing how it seemed like A House of Dynamite was being primed to be the Netflix's big push. Yeah. With that Venice premiere and the New York Film Festival domestic premiere. And everything just seemed like it was a timely enough subject that was going to play really well to the masses on Netflix, that was going to be critically acclaimed. It came out in Venice. It was really critically acclaimed by many top critics. And then things have started to change a little bit.
I think, at the very least, if you're paying attention to the race, we have some significant bellwethers, I think, going off that not everything is, peachy in paradise. So House of Dynamite had its sort of North American premiere, right? Because it goes from Venice, skips Telluride, skips Toronto, and gets selected for New York, which you would think is a harbinger of good news because New York Film Festival, has, elite taste. Yeah. And so if they're showing the Catherine Bigelow film, there's got to be something that they enjoyed about it. The issue is that, rumors started circulating amongst film Twitter about what was initially a poor reception at, I believe, a press screening for the film. And, some people have really harped on the idea that it was not greeted well there and it was met with cynicism and laughs by the end of it. Yeah. And after screening in New York, I think actually had its screening for audiences. But I think from that press screening, besides film Twitter, you had already now some critics who were taking pointed issue with its structure
Right.
And I think all of a sudden it had a couple of, pretty poor reviews show up at, the review aggregator sites.
Yeah.
Nothing super cataclysmic in terms of, like an abundance of people have, trashed it now, but it did get some, some poor ink from some notable critics. And then it's just not taking off online on social media. I think that the reception has been cold, and there's been a lot of disappointment. And
Right.
so that's one aspect. The other aspect is
Which
that,
it feels like a big 180 to what we felt post Venice
yeah,
with these 5-star reviews,
right,
4-star reviews. It was an
right,
88, 89 at one point on Metacritic. It's down now to, I believe, a 79 or an
right,
80, which is still very respectable, by the way.
exactly.
But it definitely is a big shift from what initially it seemed at
Yeah,
Venice.
it's not a film that I think is going to be this overwhelming, everyone loved it sort of movie. Nothing like, for example, One Battle After Another, which doesn't really have any really pointed negative reviews. San Francisco Chronicle, obviously not a fan, but certainly the film, Time Magazine loved it, right? Los Angeles Times really liked it, New York Times. So almost the print critics aren't a huge issue, even if they're not over the moon and it's not one battle after another. I think the big issue is online. What are people going to think about it online? And certainly in the coming days, this is before it screens to general audiences, and I don't know how they're going to react yet. And we don't even know how the political sphere is going to react to the film. So all those could be even more problematic things. I think the other thing that I was alluding to that happened is that we screened it,
Right.
right? And after screening it, I think we both understood the criticism.
Right.
I think I personally enjoyed the film, and I think that there's a lot of successes in it. Even though I understand people's issues with it, and I understand the critiques on the structure of the script, right? That was my personal feeling. I don't know if you felt the same.
Honestly, I was disappointed by the film. I expected more from a Catherine Bigelow film about this subject and with this writer, who is a writer that we quite like,
Noah.
who very much deserved recognition for Jackie in 2016. And, I felt like the script kind of let me down a little bit. And I do understand people's issue with the Rashomon style kind of, approach. I didn't have that much of an issue with that. I think I had more of an issue that as a drama, it felt to me not fleshed out. It felt undercooked, which is a weird experience when you're talking about a Catherine Bigelow film. And I know that she's very passionate about the films that she makes and the topics that she tackles. She, is very selective with the work she puts out. And so, I was expecting, something more. And I think the film leaves you wanting a lot more than what's there. And I don't know, I felt like there was some clumsiness to it. I felt, it felt a little sloppy to me, which again, I didn't expect. And there are pointed moments that are effective. I certainly think that it's a great cast of very talented actors who don't have a lot to attach to in the drama. I think the film takes a little bit of a familiar approach with regard to how it tackles the emotional and psychological state of these government officials and servants in the middle of this crisis. So to me on the page, it felt like us understanding these characters kind of was just resorting to, I'm scared for my family, I'm worried about my family. And, that's understandable and makes sense to me. But it didn't feel fleshed out. It felt a little bit stereotypical in a way. It didn't feel like, a searing drama of these human beings stuck in this, crisis and this inevitability and this chaos. It just felt like the writing was tackling it through a very kind of familiar scope that I thought, wasn't necessarily adding a lot to the film. I thought, the editing choices, some of them I thought were not as astute as I would have expected. I think the music is very reminiscent to the Conclave score. I agree with some people who've said that. And I think thematically, like the film doesn't have a lot to say after its first chapter. It's almost as if what it has to say with every subsequent chapter, it doesn't have something new to add to the story that it's telling, the drama that it's fleshing out, and so in a way I think it ends up being a much more flat exercise than I think was anticipated.
I think all those are valid points, and I think a lot of people who have seen the film share them. I think analyzing the film, though, as a potential Oscar contender, I think certainly the film suffers from just the very idea that opening chapter is just so extremely well done, and I thought super effective. That it peaks too early. But looking at it from the lens of what are voters going to think about it, I think that the piece, flaws and all, will never escape the urgency and timeliness of its subject. And so that is always going to be, at the center of the narrative of their campaign. And I think it's a huge boost, because I do think that this is going to possibly be a year where voters are trying to, address some really pressing global issues, political issues, social issues, cultural issues throughout their choices for Best Picture. And so I think that firmly keeps it in the conversation. But some things were automatically clear to me right away, just sort of analyzing the film through that lens, which is the cinematography is not going to contend.
No.
It's not attention calling enough.
Yeah.
I think you're right that the score, I found it to be extremely effective, but it may evoke the tones of Conclave a little too close, especially to go back to back. I'm not, eliminating it from that category, but I'm going to say that it's going to be a challenging nomination to get. I still feel that the film editing, has a great chance of being singled out and nominated. It's a previous nominee, Kirk Baxter, and the sound work as well is really well done. Great effects work, and it tells the story, and a lot of its storytelling is being told through the sound. So those are elements that I'm more confident in, that it's certainly still in the race to get that nomination. I'm not sure I would call any of them a guarantee. I don't know if you would agree with that, that either of those two categories are a guarantee for.
No, I don't. I personally feel that there's no guarantee with this movie. I think it's a film that can easily fall through the cracks and not summon enough passion to land a Best Picture nomination or to land a Best Screenplay nomination. I think most voters, my gut is that they're not going to think it's one of Catherine Bigelow's strongest efforts. Certainly, you're right. The timeliness of the piece is an asset that can't be ignored, and it certainly keeps it in the conversation. But I don't see a unanimous sort of attachment to this project from voters in all regards. And so I don't think that any category is extremely likely. And I think it's very, very likely, very possible rather, that the film could miss completely.
Right. Jumping off that point, I do think that Catherine Bigelow is not going to be a strong contender for director. And I even think that some of the sharpest criticisms that are being levied on the piece are possibly going to hurt its bid for original screenplay, because a lot of that is on the page. So all of a sudden you go from a film where after Venice it seemed it could be nominated for 6 or 7, but now we're kind of going back and saying, here's a film that, if the urgency of the piece and of the topic, the subject matter, is enough to get it over the hurdle, it seems to me like it's going to be a little bit more in the 4 range, if you want to be very kind of like Don't Look Up, which I think is a great parallel for this movie, or possibly in the 2 range, kind of like The Post, which I think is another great parallel for this movie. So if the subject matter is something that voters want, audiences to pay attention to, it could be Best Picture and Screenplay. If it's something again, that's they don't want to leave it off the list because of the subject matter. It could be like Don't Look Up and be picture, screenplay, and 2 below the line categories, possibly film editing and sound, or maybe sound and score, something like that. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it right now.
I feel like after seeing the film, I would be very surprised if this is Netflix's big film. I don't think it will be. And I think, you know, Netflix, I think, is having a great year, and they still stand to have at least one, and what I think very probably 2 films land in the Best Picture top 10. But I'm not sure that this is one of them.
I mean,
and even if it does, as you were saying, I think it's a film that ends up being included in the 9th or 10th spot, and not nowhere near the top 5 or 6 or 7,
which is not great. And I think that's really Netflix's issue this year, is that they don't really have. We already know what the top 5 films are, more or less, possibly in the top 6 or 7, and no Netflix title is on there. And so Netflix really has to sort of get their act together, because they're going to end up scrambling like they did in 2022 for All Quiet on the Western Front. But I do think that what's interesting here is that, again, that parallel of Don't Look Up, right, where critics absolutely hated it, and it was, very polarizing online. But the mere presence of DiCaprio and Streep and Blanchett in a film from Adam McKay about that subject matter is enough to help it get in one of those final 2 spots. And again, the critics for this film are solid.
Yeah.
Are very, very solid.
Yeah.
If it were to be nominated, it would certainly be one of the, higher films, one of the more well-regarded films from print media,
right,
if not necessarily film Twitter.
Right. I 100% agree. But like I said, I'm very curious to see how the film is going to play out on streaming for the world at large and the domestic audience. I'm very curious to see how political channels kind of interpret the piece. And right now I'm sensing, and again, it's just a sense, but right now I feel like things feel a little bit quiet. I would expect that this film would have more of a thunderous sort of reception in the streaming world. Something that helped Don't Look Up is that it did have that. The critics were very subpar, but it was a huge hit on Netflix, and people were watching it, and people were, enjoying it, or they had opinions about it.
Right.
Right now this film feels like it's too quiet. And if the only pocket that's seemingly super passionate about it is, as you were saying, this print media, but it's lacking, online, and it's going to lack in, viewership on streaming, then again, I don't really see how this can be propelled into a multi-nominated film. I mean, that's how I'm seeing it right now, at least.
Right.
But that brings me into a very interesting topic that you and I have been talking about for a while, and it's and this sort of started to crystallize for us after we saw A House of Dynamite, but even before, as we were updating our predictions, a film that I think not enough people are putting enough stock into, and that I think at this very moment you and I really feel strongly is the Netflix push, and it's going to be the Netflix movie that gets into Best Picture, at least their prime horse that gets into Best Picture, is actually Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which has had a very interesting trajectory in the film festival sort of sphere, because it premiered in Venice. It got I think a 10-minute or 15-minute or however long the standing ovation was. And then it premiered at Telluride and people were lukewarm. And then it premiered at Toronto and people were at Telluride and people were lukewarm. But at Toronto, it bounced back incredibly. Huge, and even landed the number 2 spot in the People's Choice, which was a very big surprise. And, people were enjoying it. The film comes out in very select cities. I mean, you and I won't get a chance to see it till next week. But it comes out in very select spots. It's a 78 on Metacritic, and that's a pretty darn good score. It's close to House of Dynamite. They're pretty much even. And so you and I were tracking the predictions, and we were seeing that Guillermo del Toro's film stood to get nominations in these places, in these categories, and these below the line categories that if it were true that that film stands to land those nominations, it's really a sign that this film is going to end up being a multi-nominated film and a Best Picture nominee, because Guillermo del Toro's films don't get into those categories unless they are Best Picture nominees.
Yeah, I think that we have a sort of a patented theory before somebody, steals it. Just the idea that the Netflix Best Picture movie traditionally should be a cinematography movie.
Yeah.
There's immense overlap there ever since they've been able to break into that category.
They've never missed.
They've never missed. They've doubled up plenty of times. They've gotten surprise nominations for films that were otherwise did not perform well. If you think of something like Bardo. But Netflix's Best Picture, whatever film they get in, should be in the cinematography circle. That's held up thus far ever since they got in, or ever since ever since it got on for 2018. I mean, Mudbound
still made it to right,
got into cinematography, but there's an argument to be made that had there been 10 spots, it would have been Mudbound, possibly. Right. But other than that first year where they got into anything, they've been able to crack Best Picture through cinematographers. And I think you and I thought that A House of Dynamite and Barry Ackroyd, his positioning in the industry, the fact that he got snubbed for Captain Phillips, made A House of Dynamite an excellent choice. And again, he could still be nominated and it could still happen, but on screen, it seems like something that's going to call out to cinematographers less.
Yeah, much less.
But Frankenstein seems like it could be an excellent choice for that spot.
Yeah.
And if Netflix focuses their efforts on that, on, getting into Best Picture through the cinematography nomination, Frankenstein makes the most sense. The other thing I'll say is that you and I, again, another patented theory we have is just the idea that the TIFF People's Choice Award winner is really important. The movies that make it and the movies that place. If it wasn't for Neon Railroading, Life of Chuck last year, who knows what would have happened. But it's a meaningful thing to win it. It's a meaningful thing to place. The fact that Frankenstein placed as the runner-up, I think puts it in extremely strong position to steal a nomination for its screenplay.
Right.
The TIFF winners have an excellent trajectory for the screenplay categories at the Oscars. You're talking about winners, whether it's Women Talking, how it ended up.
When you say winners, you mean they placed at least?
Yes, I'm saying if they placed among the top three, the win, the first runner-up, the second runner-up, they usually get screenplay nominations at the Oscars. Now, here's a caveat. If they're Canadian productions or productions that didn't come out, that doesn't usually happen. So Life of Chuck didn't happen last year, Life of Chuck, although maybe it still happens this year, but it doesn't happen, for example, for a Canadian title like Beans, which did really well and placed. But if you look at a film, for example, like One Night in Miami, they still get a screenplay nomination. Women Talking only gets 2 nominations that year, gets a screenplay nomination, gets the screenplay win. So more often than not, American Fiction wins the People's Choice Award, gets the Best Picture nomination, but it also gets the Adapted Screenplay win. More often than not, the screenplay winner is among that TIFF 3.
Right.
And we know Hamnet won, and that's an adapted screenplay. But the 3 of them, as long as they're not necessarily strictly a Canadian production,
they're all adapted screenplays, by the way.
They're all adapted screenplays, and all of them should have a good shot at being nominated for adapted screenplay. Everyone figures for Hamnet. Everyone believes Hamlet's going to do it. Everyone is very confident that Wake Up Dead Man's going to do it because Knives Out has had a good trajectory there. But no one is paying attention to Frankenstein.
Right.
And so if Frankenstein is a cinematography nominee for Netflix, and if it's a screenplay nominee for Guillermo, it's really difficult to believe that it's not going to be a Best Picture nominee.
Right.
And so we had thought, for example, maybe it's going to ride the same trajectory as Nightmare Alley and just get production design, costume design, cinematography, and they'll miss Best Picture because you don't have the Fox Searchlight factor, which is usually at play here. And Searchlight usually makes it into the top 10 for Best Picture. And that's certainly what happened to Nightmare Alley. It had, frontrunner status so long, came out, completely obliterated by the box office, but the Searchlight sort of card helps it get in,
No,
especially in a year where you're forcing 10.
well, yeah, but it was also the post-pandemic, so
Post-pandemic, yeah, so
the box
people
office mattered a little
people
less.
were extremely forgiving. But between Guillermo, having his comeback effort after finally winning, which usually does well. If you look at 127 Hours, Zero Dark 30, coming off a win, they're extremely welcoming for you to get back into Best Picture. So between that, between the remake, between Fox Searchlight, all that is enough to a forced top 10. All that is enough to help Nightmare Alley make it in. We thought that because it's Netflix, maybe Frankenstein's not going to have the best shot because you have Jay Kelly and it's about the industry, and then you have House of Dynamite and it's about
Very timely.
Nuclear armament or disarmament, and so we thought there's just no way it's going to stand out. But now that we're kind of thinking about it, it's kind of in the perfect position to do that.
Right.
The other thing that we sort of mentioned as we updated our predictions, and we've included Frankenstein in Best Picture now, is the idea that there's also this kind of trend where the Academy has been really open to recognizing these adaptations of like iconic literary works.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Little Women. We mentioned All Quiet on the Western Front,
Right.
which was a big reason why it was able to become Netflix's main push in 2022. And Frankenstein still fits that bill.
Yeah.
Even if it's a lavish and very idiosyncratic interpretation, possibly, it still fits the bill of having the prestige of being adapted from
This iconic work.
the iconic work from Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing we talked about is that, if the film does well in production design, costume design, cinematography, score, they say is lovely, that's already 4. There's going to be makeup. Everyone talks about the makeup. That's 5. The sound work and the work they're doing for the creature, that could end up being a factor. That's 6. Guillermo del Toro plays for Tiff, so that's 7 if you include writing. You include picture, that's 8. But there's another element here, which is that everyone loves the performance from Jacob Elordi.
Right.
And so if you get actors involved, right, because Jacob Elordi's performance is at least good enough to be listed at the Golden Globes,
Yes.
who are going to be happy to list him, at the SAG, who are going to be happy to list him, then actors are going to watch this movie. I think personally that it helped that Cate Blanchett probably got pretty close for Nightmare Alley. That helped, actors put on the screener and watch the screener and prioritize it. And that helped Nightmare Alley get a Best Picture nomination at the end.
Right. Exactly. And I think that as we were going through the categories, these are categories that if Guillermo del Toro gets in, he's usually gotten in to these categories with his Best Picture movies. So, costume design, for example, when he gets into costume design, it usually ends up being a Best Picture film. And a very interesting stat that we saw was that Alexander Desplat, when Alexander Desplat gets nominated.
Yeah, whenever Alexander Desplat has managed to be nominated for a live action film, a non-animated film, that film has been nominated for Best Picture.
Yes.
And so everyone talks about the score in this film, and it feels inevitable that Desplat is going to be nominated for this.
Right.
And again, the only times he's missed, as far as I can recall, is Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Right, an animated film.
And Isle of Dogs, I believe.
2 Wes Anderson films.
2 Wes Anderson animated films.
Yeah.
Right? He ended up winning for the Wes Anderson live action film that finally made it into Best Picture, right? Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you take stock and you look at, again, Guillermo's film, when they get into costume design, they usually get an eye for Best Picture. When they get into production design, they usually get an eye for Best Picture. The stat we just said about Alexander Desplat, we look at cinematography, we look at screenplay, we look at the TIFF number 2 choice. It just seems like everything is aligning in such a way that Frankenstein stands to be Netflix's big movie at the Academy Awards.
If they were smart, they would already throw all their weight behind that, because that's probably going to be the film that ranks highest, because it's going to have all that broad support. Again, I think that even if somehow Jacob Elordi doesn't make it in, and I think he's in a fantastic position to make it in.
I will say that, and we've been talking about this, I'm not 100% sure yet that they'll welcome Jacob Elordi into the club. I think the Academy has always been a little bit cautious about young men making it into categories. I think they're a little bit skittish. I think let's just put it this way. The barrier of entry for a young woman to get nominated is, I think, a little easier than it is for a young man, especially a young, let's call it, for lack of a better phrase, hot commodity,
Right.
like Jacob Elordi,
Right.
who's really impressing with his filmography, but
Right.
he's very in the moment. He's very of the moment. People are obsessed with him. His talent, his physically. So I think that kind of puts these voters a little cautious mode about whether they want to put him into that club or not. So I'm not 100% sold that'll happen just yet, but I do 100% believe that he will be nominated for the Golden Globe and he will be nominated for the SAG. And that's just a hop and a skip away to getting nominated at the Academy Awards.
I think all that is accurate. That's the way I'm seeing it also. I think he's going to come incredibly close if he doesn't get in. I think one thing that always rubbed me the wrong way was the idea that, can you really have a supporting actor category that has both Paul Mescal and Jacob Elordi?
It seems a little weird to me.
It does seem a little bit weird, but I do think that people are going to look at Jacob at this point and say, okay, well, he was already in Saltburn, and he was already in Priscilla, and he was in the Justin Kurzel miniseries.
Right.
And so I think he's acquired enough respect to get a nomination there, not unlike, for example, Barry Keoghan when he got nominated for Banshees of Inisherin. And so it makes a lot of sense to finally put him in. And I think it helps that it's a supporting nomination and not a lead nomination, right? Where you're maybe going to be a little less strict.
Yeah,
right?
There's a semblance here. I don't know if I can make this comparison, but there's a semblance here of like Brad Pitt and 12 Monkeys.
Oh.
Kind of like Brad Pitt is able to get in, and some people forget about this, but he gets in to supporting actor for 12 Monkeys. And of course, he was very much already a very, hot commodity as well.
Right.
It helped that he was going into supporting. It helped that it was a performance that made a lot of voters see him in a different light, see sort of a depth to him that they weren't familiar with.
Right.
And I think Jacob Elordi is going to be able to do this in this film. I just think that if you look at our predictions, he's going to end up battling, I think, mostly Adam Sandler for Jake Kelly.
The other Netflix guy.
Exactly. And possibly Benicio del Toro for One Battle After Another, which I think you and I feel more confident about.
Right.
So, I mean, it really comes down to, will he be able to edge out Adam Sandler or Benicio del Toro for that fifth spot?
Well, I think we're feeling very confident about where Frankenstein is headed in terms of its text, and we're seeing it paint a very bright picture for its prospects and Best Picture. I think we're still waiting on supporting actor, although we think that he's at least going to get
close,
very close, and he's going to get his first SAG nom, first Globe nom, all that on the film side. I'm gonna leave the final point on Frankenstein and Best Picture and Best Supporting Actor on this. I think it may help Jacob that he's Australian. I think that may be a factor here that helps him get that nomination at the end. That's something to think about, because the Australian faction or sector of the Academy, it exists.
Yes.
And they are responsible for Jackie Weaver getting in for Animal Kingdom. So watch out.
Yeah,
Keep an eye for that.
Yes. So, bottom line, watch out for Frankenstein. And our bet right now is that will be Netflix's big movie.
That's what it's looking like, at least.
Now, another film that we finally got a chance to see, actually, I have not seen. I'm looking forward to it, but you have seen it. And that is Luca Guadagnino's After the Hunt, which is just came out on Friday to an expanded theater run after a limited run. So, and you had read the script previously,
I did.
So that's very interesting. Let's talk about that.
I mean, it was fascinating because I think there is so much different from this original script that I read, the draft that I read. A lot of significant changes happened, and yet, in my personal opinion, none of them helped the movie. I don't see the reason for the changes. It's almost like you put all that effort in to make things a little bit different, sometimes even significantly different, but you really went nowhere. So it was very disappointing. I think, it's certainly one of the more disappointing films from Luca's, filmography.
I think that's a general consensus. I mean, if you look at the Metacritic score and the Rotten Tomato score, undoubtedly this is Luca's least well received film. It's a
Right.
51 on Metacritic. I think it's a 40 on Rotten Tomatoes. So, this film has not done well with critics. And I will, I don't mean to toot our own horn, but I will say that you and I, from the very beginning, before its Venice premiere, were already predicting that this film was going to do a lot more poorly than people were anticipating. At the time that we were saying that After the Hunt looked poised to disappoint, pundits were having it in their top 5 for Best Picture and Best Director and Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress and Best Supporting, just everywhere, all over the place. But you and I were already sensing a lot of red flags here.
And I will say that it's just coming out, so I'm sure listeners are going to try to check it out and form their own opinion. You haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm really excited, though. I can't wait.
I want you to see it because you're a bigger Luca fan than I am. I enjoy his films.
I love Luca.
But you love all his films, and you especially love his 2 most recent films.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to make the argument that this film is reactionary to those films, their successes and their lack of successes, and that despite everything, I think there's a very personal artistic statement being made here. But I think it's a more fascinating movie to analyze between the lines as opposed to what's on screen. I think what's on screen mostly doesn't work and is, very difficult to fathom how so many talented people can get together and just come up with that. At the same time, if you start analyzing the film between the lines, I think it's immensely fascinating to think about, what the filmmaker is really thinking and what's, really on his mind. Motivation, for example. What are his motivations here? And so I think, watch that and I'm curious to hear what you think. But certainly I think there was this idea that Julia Roberts could survive, the poor critics. And I think it's not doing too bad in the box office, not doing great, but it's a, limited run. We know it's kind of, its life is really on Prime Video. My big question is how well audiences are going to react to it. And so far, I don't think it's great. I think it's a little bit lukewarm also. But seeing the film and seeing how the film is sort of constructed, it's difficult for me to imagine Julia Roberts getting much traction anywhere for the film. I think there's an opportunity maybe for her to get a Globe nom, maybe. But I was someone who thought, well, she's respected enough and it might be risky enough that they give her a Globe and a SAG and maybe she gets close. We sort of talk about this idea that the best actress lineup, the main contenders, throw that category possibly as way too young on average.
Yeah.
You should have a more veteran presence there.
Yes.
You should have someone of Annette Bening stature.
Yeah.
Right. And the heavy contenders this year, between the people who are locked in, and then you have, Chase Infinity, and you have Rose Byrne, and you have Jennifer Lawrence and Emma Stone, it skews very young.
Yeah.
Which favors, rarely does it ever go that young. It's possible, but it's not common.
It's not common.
And so you have to start looking at these more veteran actresses who have had more years in the industry, more successes, or just more work. And so,
but there's a very small pool of them.
And there's a very small pool. I mean, obviously, we talked about Lucy Liu, right, in Rosemead, which is a real character, and that helps.
I have seen that.
June Squibb is a former nominee.
Yes.
Right? You've seen that one also, Honor the Great.
Yes.
And she would, I think, be the oldest nominee if she were to get in. That's directed by Scarlett Johansson. I think that has a great shot at getting in for a SAG because SAG voters love to nominate films directed by one of their own. So look out for that. But then you have Julia Roberts, right? Which on paper, she's coming back. She has this really meaty role. She's going to be on the big screen. Luca's directing it. But it just falls flat in so many ways. And just the way that the film is approached, the way it's lensed, it doesn't really give her much to work with. And so because of that, to me, I think there's a real possibility that the film doesn't get any nominations whatsoever, that, Lucy Liu for Rosemead can squeeze her out of the Golden Globe if it's campaigned right. So that's something that I think I'd be aware of. I think I'd be very surprised if Julia Roberts got more than one. And I actually think it's more possible that Julia Roberts doesn't get any.
Right. And I think, as you were saying, it's very strange because, again, there should be a more veteran presence here in terms of age. The pool is very small. Again, I will say, I think Eleanor the Great is a very flawed film. I think that's evident enough in its low critic score. And I think that Rosemead has a lot of issues as well that I don't see that film making an impact on the awards race either. Of course, it's yet to come out, so
Vertical
we'll see what
Entertainment.
happens. It's also Vertical, which is a smaller studio.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just not a lot of good options. But it's weird to have an actress category again so young. If you take stock, and of course I'm an obsessive, so I have, Rose Byrne right now is the oldest person in this, in contention for this actress race at 46. So I mean, everyone else is in their 30s,
Right.
Amanda Seyfried, Cynthia Erivo,
That's
Emma
nuts.
Stone, Chase Infinity's in her 20s, Renata, Jessie Buckley is 35, I believe. It's just way too young, but I don't think they have anywhere else to go.
I do wonder about that, and I think the person possibly in best position to make a run for it is June Squibb, not Julia.
Right. I mean, between those two options.
And even Lucy Liu. I mean, just the vertical entertainment part could be a complication. But I think that it helps that she's a real person. That's certainly going to help her a lot.
And speaking just very briefly about the best actress race, Joseph had written an article that, our predictions now reflect, the recent announcement that the Testament of Evan Lee was finally picked up by Searchlight. We had thought that it was going to be Netflix.
Right.
Searchlight made perfect sense after A Rental Family didn't do as well as was hoped after Toronto.
Right.
Didn't get that top prize, and they were probably hoping that top prize they could write into a Best Picture nomination. They're going to try their best with The Testament of Van Lee, which is rapturously received by critics, but I think it's going to have a really tough time selling to general audiences. Breaking out, even with a very respectable budget of $10 million.
Mm-hmm.
But Amanda Seyfried finally solves a big issue in this category, which is that we finally have an actor playing a real life figure.
Right.
And so even if Ann Lee ends up getting 0 nominations everywhere else, this is one category where it's destined to get nominated by just the mere fact that it'll be an actor playing a real life figure. And these acting categories tend to at least have one representation of that in the category. So that's something interesting.
I think that's also considering that we're saying that maybe Jessie Buckley's performance or interpretation is a little too loose, right?
Yeah, no, because we can't, we're not gonna. She's not really Anne Hathaway, right? She has a different name, right. Agnes, and it's also a fictional historical account, right. So she doesn't qualify exactly, but Amanda Seyfried does.
I mean, yes, I don't know how much Ann Lee was out there, right. singing and chanting. Right. That I don't know.
Right.
But again, it just gives you that idea that if you were a little bit iffy on the Jessie Buckley being the real person, certainly Amanda Seyfried, I think makes it more likely that the voters are going to feel like I included somebody real, which is what they tend to like to do.
Right.
And so I think that's where After the Hunt is right now.
Right.
And I don't think it helps that Amazon, MGM, right. Amazon totally they don't really know what to do with any film.
But technically they might have done better in putting their hopes on something like Hedda, which I think had a better reception.
Yeah, possibly.
And that maybe they could have turned that around into a more hard-hitting awards contender.
Yeah, I just don't think that they really care, to be perfectly honest. I don't think that's their modus operandi.
Well, we talked about it after you saw it. We do feel like, in a way, there's a possibility that this was maybe possibly Luca was coerced into making this film.
That's what I'm saying.
It kind of feels like it's not.
Everyone, if you get a chance to see it in theaters, and let's be honest, most people will watch it on streaming. When you watch it on streaming, you can make your own interpretation. I have certainly my feelings as to what I felt the filmmaker was actually saying. So that's it.
I'm really looking forward to it. And you had very, very honest thoughts about the score, for example, and some of the performances. Oh. So, I can't wait to check it out, and I hope you guys will check it out as well. Next, the film that I saw quite recently was Richard Linklater's Blue Moon, which is coming out on Friday. Blue Moon has, stayed in the stratosphere of the, awards world and the awards circuit since its premiere in Berlin, which I think is quite impressive.
Yeah.
Especially when you take into account that the film is, very much a chamber piece, one setting, very, not flashy, as we, is expected with a lot of Richard Linklater's work. It's a lot of dialogue. And again, it's very much in a certain kind of pace for the entire runtime. And this is one of two films that Richard Linklater has this year. The other being the film that we saw at Cannes, Nouveau Vague, another Netflix film. And so Blue Moon, I think, has been unanimously praised by critics. Ethan Hawke is playing Lawrence Hart post his sort of creative breakup with Richard Rodgers, when Richard Rodgers and Hammerstein were starting their creative impact and starting Oklahoma. Ethan Hawke has been, again, also unanimously praised for his performance, and undoubtedly it's a very impressive performance. Everything from, the way that the character walks, his mannerisms, everything is very attuned and precise, very meticulous, a lot of meticulous details. He gets a lot of monologues in the film that give him a platform to really showcase his performance. It's not one of my favorite Richard Linklater films, even though I will say that there's a current of melancholy in the film that's quite palpable and very effective. It's actually a very sad story of a very creative genius, some would say, and certainly an artist who was attuned to a certain kind of beauty, and an artist that contributed a lot to the artistic world. And so the way his story sort of unfolds is quite tragic. And I thought the film was very sensitive about that, but also not sentimental. And it was very resonant. But I will say that from an awards perspective, I can't help but think that, its sort of static nature is not something, it could be something that affects its awards prospects, even though, again, it's a very acclaimed performance. And Ethan Hawke very famously was snubbed for First Reformed when he absolutely should have been nominated in 2018. In fact, I believe he should have won. And Ethan Hawke, I think, has only gained in stature within the acting community. He's one of our greatest actors, who certainly deserves more than, I believe, 2 acting nominations. He also has 2 writing nominations. There aren't many actors that sort of exist in those 2 spaces as an actor and a writer. So I think he's very respected. And so a nomination for him this year makes a lot of sense. However, I can't help but feel like, again, the way the film exists, that it's something that, again, some voters might be a little bit, dare I say, a little bit bored by, something that they, have a difficulty penetrating because it's so still, because it's so static, and because it's so, dialogue driven. It's because it's very wordy, and we're very much in one place. I think we're really in one restaurant, one bar, and not traveling very in many departments within that bar. And certainly the moments that most resonated with me, actually, interestingly enough, were when I got to see Lawrence Hart having these very complicated dynamics with Andrew Scott's character, Richard Rodgers, and with Margaret Qualley's character, Elizabeth Welland, who's an up and coming, I believe, costume designer student, who Lawrence Hart is having a sort of an obsession with. And every time that the 3 of them were either together, or Margaret and Ethan were together, or Ethan and Andrew were together, I felt the film felt really lively and really richly textured, and felt really, just very much less so when we were in a monologue driven space, where we're, hearing and seeing Ethan Hawke's character, and, again, these lengthy speeches. There's something about that for me was a little bit harder to penetrate, even though, again, the script is very witty. It's actually quite funny, and also wise, as a lot of Richard Linklater's work is. But I can't help but feel like makes the piece, its static nature is harder to penetrate, makes the piece a little harder to penetrate, or that it will be a little bit harder to penetrate for the voter, for the Academy voter, or that if Ethan Hawke has to battle for that 4th or 5th spot, and he has this kind of film, which again is, very still in a way, with something that is a little bit more dynamic, physically, visually, tangibly, that could hurt him in that competition. And that someone like, for example, Jeremy Allen White, who might be in a film, again, is also playing a real life figure, another figure that's an iconic figure, part of the arts world, Springsteen, that you and I have been feeling for a long time that Springsteen, that movie stands to possibly only land a Best Actor nomination and be like a solo nomination, because it doesn't seem poised to land in many other departments. And so if at the end of the day that last spot is going to be a competition between Ethan Hawke and Jeremy Allen White, I'm not sure that Ethan Hawke's movie ends up beating possibly a more, on the surface, dynamic film like the Springsteen film. So I would be very cautious about that. And I'm not 100% sold that the Ethan Hawke nomination is going to happen. Again, I do think voters will be impressed by that transformation. I think that the physical transformation is also quite impressive. The stature he has to have, the physical stature, and his look, his facial expressions, all of that is very, I think, resonant and impactful. But I just don't think he's in the right package to land that nomination, that solo nomination. I do think that the film would mostly be only a Best Actor nomination. That's it. And so a battle between, Jeremy Allen White and Ethan Hawke, who wins there? I'm not 100% sold that he's in the right package to win that competition.
I think that I haven't seen the film yet, but I think all the points you're making are strong ones. I think something to keep in mind is two things that are possibly going to maybe help Ethan, steal that last spot is Sony Picture Classics.
Yes.
Right. And they know how to campaign. But I think there's also an argument to be made that when these smaller, studio distribution arms, when they finally get in to the Oscars in such a major way, the way that Sony Picture Classics was able to get I'm Still Here recognized for actress and Best Picture, their limited sort of resources are exhausted. And so it's very difficult for them to then go and contend immediately the next year. And you're seeing Sony Picture Classics run into that because they don't have a very good Best Picture movie. And you're seeing Mubi run into that, right? Which got the substance in. But again, its resources are absolutely exhausted. They don't have, I think, the bandwidth or the money to launch these massive campaigns for movies that are worthwhile, like Blue Moon or Die My Love. So I think that's something to keep in mind, even if it is Sony Picture Classics, how much muscle do they have left? But one thing that's kind of interesting that you mentioned was not only just limited nominations for Ethan Hawke as an actor, but he's actually never been nominated for lead actor at all.
Yeah.
And you and I had the conversation of, well, maybe the next time Ethan Hawke is nominated, maybe it feels like he's going to win for that one. Because he certainly seems like an actor who will win at some point in his career. And so I don't think that you feel that Blue Moon is that Oscar-winning performance.
And that's a really good point, and we talked about that. In a way, again, I think Ethan Hawke is such a respected actor and one of our greatest actors, again, I repeat, that if you're telling me that he's going to make it into a category at fourth or fifth and he's not going to pull the win because right now the momentum is somewhere else, which we'll discuss later, it's kind of harder for me to see the nomination because it feels like the next time we see Ethan Hawke in this category or in an acting category, it's because he's gonna win that category. And I really very much feel like this is not the category for him to win. This is not the performance or the film for him to win. And so I'm really unsure. I'm really unsure about it.
I suppose maybe there's an argument here that the voters may feel like, how many chances am I actually going to get to nominate Ethan in lead? Because he doesn't always go lead. And so if I'm going to make this if you're a voter and you're thinking, if I'm going to make this an empty nomination for Ethan because I know that there's no way that he's going to win, then at the very least I have just the idea that he got that lead nomination at some point in his career.
Right.
Because you're not sure if he's really going to come back to having a lead role that appeals to them in such a strong way. So I think those are the two things to keep in mind in terms of Ethan Hawke.
I think that once we get a better, sort of temperature check on Jeremy Allen White's film and how that's perceived by critics and finally by the box
Audiences.
office.
Yeah.
You know, I can see the respect for Ethan Hawke, and certainly the transformation will be impressive enough
Right.
that he trumps Jeremy Allen White and gets that 5th spot. But right now, I'm just worried that Springsteen is going to call their attention a little bit more just by the very nature of the way the film is made.
Right.
So, you know, we'll see what happens there. Again, Ethan Hawke is one of our greats, and never not a good performance from him. And certainly this is one of his most showy performances. And speaking of actors, another film we saw quite recently was Anemone with the great Daniel Day-Lewis.
Right. We were able to see that like right off of its screening from New York Film Festival. So we had an opinion more or less right as the first audiences were experiencing it. Interestingly enough, I think that most people that we saw it with, I would argue that it was a very divisive film. I know that, for example, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I know you a little bit.
I did not like it at all.
You did not enjoy it. And again, I think that was the experience also coming out of that first screening for press and industry for Anemone at the New York Film Festival where it debuted. There were some critics that enjoyed it immensely. And then there were a lot that said it's kind of a poor outing. Yeah. It is a first film. It's directed by Daniel Day-Lewis's son. I think again, I'm look forward to his next film. I hope he continues making films. I think there's a lot of strong things about it. But you know, putting on again the lens of what's the Academy going to think? Daniel Day-Lewis gives an extremely scene-chewing performance. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was very lived in. I thought it spoke to him as an artist and his own exile, possibly. And so this is actually one performance that I would actually not sort of dismiss very quickly, despite critics not being over the moon about it and it not making a lot of noise at the box office and it, maybe, premiering quickly in New York and then going right into theaters, not having a huge run of word of mouth. Despite all that, Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, I think, is memorable. I think demonstrates why he's so admired among his peers. And I just think he has the material. So I would be very surprised if it doesn't get a Golden Globe nomination. I'd be shocked if it didn't get a BAFTA nomination. I don't know if it would get a SAG. I'm not sure he needs a SAG. But if we're talking about, veteran actors and, I think we feel comfortable with Leo getting in because of the, where One Battle is in terms of the Oscar race. But we talk about George Clooney and sort of some of the virtues and shortcomings of that piece. I can totally see Daniel Day-Lewis taking that spot away from George Clooney because the material is possibly a little bit more interesting, maybe has a wider scope, possibly less about movies. I also think there's an interesting aspect going on if you watch the film, an interesting discussion going on between Daniel Day-Lewis and his previous performances. There's an element here, this isn't a spoiler, there's an element here that has to do with the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and Daniel Day-Lewis early in the 90s. Yeah. This was a theme that was constantly revisited in his work with the time that he spent alongside Jim Sheridan, for example, in the name of the Father. They worked on The Boxer together. And so it's kind of an interesting discussion that's going on here. And I have to think that there's possibly a narrative where voters say, okay, well, Daniel Day-Lewis been there, done that. But there's also something to be said about, oh, well, Daniel Day-Lewis, it's another sort of interesting layer or interpretation to this dynamic and to this, theme that he's explored throughout his career. And now you're revisiting it again. And it's not necessarily a shallow reinterpretation. No, it's trying to add a new layer to that previous work. And so I do think that's going to be an interesting element. But I'm certainly someone who thinks that Daniel Day-Lewis is still thickly in the hunt. And if the 4th or 5th spot is empty, his name alone is going to make you put the screener on. And I would argue that possibly more than half are going to be impressed with what he does. And then possibly the big majority is going to say, I'm glad he's not retired. Even though I'm sure some people are going to say, then why the hell did you say you were retired?
Well, I mean, I feel quite differently than you. I'm not going to say I hated it, you know, but I will say I was quite disappointed by the film. I agree with the, you know, I think the overall criticism of the piece. I think the film is undercooked. I think there's a lot of DNA here of Roman De Lewis, you know, being a beginning filmmaker and not having a piece yet that transcends or that reaches its full potential. It's underdeveloped. I think he, as an artist, has a flair for the visuals. So I think that's quite evident in the film. But other than that, his script and his story, I think he co-wrote it, didn't he, with Daniel?
Yes. Yeah.
The script and the story is quite underdeveloped and quite flat. And so it's true that Daniel Day-Lewis has, I think, maybe possibly 3 big monologues,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where he gets to speak. But they can't help but feel like a talented actor delivering a monologue, you know, because there's just not enough depth in the film and the story and the script and to what he's saying for it to resonate and for it to transcend. And so it just feels at some point like you're sitting there watching and hearing this one of our greatest actors delivering a monologue.
Right.
It doesn't feel like a cohesive character just yet. And so just the entire piece, I think, is just way underdeveloped. And I think it doesn't help that a film like this, you know, feeling this way, I think it doesn't help that it's his son directing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we start to get into that territory, that Nepo territory,
Right.
which is, you know, was Roman really ready to make his first feature? And again, being in the privileged position of being able to make this first feature with the resources that he had to make this film, I think people, you know, critics certainly, but voters will also be extra hard on, you know, is the film successful, and if it isn't successful, then be extra hard on it because it's not. Because again, this is a privileged position that a lot of other beginning filmmakers don't get.
Yeah, they may not. Yeah,
and so I think that's going against the film as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's in the thick of the conversation. I think he's more in the periphery of the conversation.
Daniel.
And so I think, you know, he'll always have the respect of his peers. So sure, possibly a BAFTA nomination, possibly a Globe nomination. I think there's absolutely no way he gets nominated for an Oscar for this film. And the big disagreement I have with you with something that you said is that you said, well, you know, if we're looking for a 4th or 5th spot, there is no that in this year's Best Actor race because it's packed. It's packed with actors in better films who are giving incredibly celebrated performances. So when you don't go to Ethan Hawke, you can go to Joel Edgerton. You can go to Jeremy Allen White. You can go to Jesse Plemons. You can go to Michael B. Jordan. It's a packed category that it's sort of a shame because it's going to be undoubtedly a category where several deserving actors will miss. So when you put it in that context, I think he's very much behind all these contenders. And I think, like I said, I see him more as a bona fide periphery contender, nowhere near the thick of it. That's the way I'm seeing it.
I mean, I get that point of view. I just think that despite all those actors that you mentioned and all those performances and all those films
Fighting for 4th and 5th,
none of them are Daniel Day-Lewis.
Right.
And Daniel Day-Lewis will hold a special place, I think, in voters' minds. You know, he's made such unique history with the wins he has already. I just don't think, as celebrated as they are, I think there's a reason why Daniel Day-Lewis has 3 lead actor Oscars and Ethan Hawke has not been nominated for lead actor. He just does not have, I think, that same standing. I think there's a reason why George Clooney has 3 lead actor nominations and doesn't have 1 win, and Daniel Day-Lewis has 3. And so I'm saying that could potentially be a factor. This is a guy who doesn't come out and act very often. When he does, he rarely disappoints. And
I will say this was a rare disappointment. I will
Yes,
say when you look at his filmography and you look at the critical reception, I would say this very much falls in line with, the nines, where it's it's very clearly, a flawed piece, and there are more flaws to it than pros. I mean, at least the general consensus. I know that you liked it.
I mean, I do think there's something to be said about the idea that when Daniel gets in, and more often than not, he gets in and he wins, they tend to be Best Picture movies.
Yeah.
And so this certainly is not a Best Picture movie, but I can't help but feel that Focus Features,
who already has a very big contender,
understood that we are going to move Paul Mescal out of the way of Day-Lewis, an actor. Because you can just keep Paul Mescal there and he can get a nomination for actor. You hope to shift him down and maybe get a second with a category shift, right? But if the movie is really a top 2 movie to win Best Picture, then it really shouldn't be much of a discussion. Paul Mescal should have that spot in actor.
Well, no,
but I do feel...
I think in terms of screen time, some people thought that, the most appropriate thing was to be placed in supporting.
And that may be what some people feel. But what I'm saying is, I don't know how small the screen time is. I haven't seen it yet. We haven't screened it. We'll screen it soon. But barring, very limited screen time, you could push him into lead. I really wonder if he's going to have less screen time in Hamnet, which is a shorter film, than Leo has in One Battle After Another. It's not like Leo has every scene in one battle either.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that Focus Features said, we can campaign Daniel despite the reception of the film. Let's get Paul out of his way. And not only is that going to benefit Paul with a category shift, in which case we can campaign Paul for the win in that category, and we can campaign Jesse for the win in that category, but we can possibly steal the 4th or 5th spot in actor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why I'm saying that among the people I've mentioned thus far, I think Daniel is the one that I would look out for the most, because I think he has the most respect and admiration from his peers.
Right. Well, again, we're a little bit, we think differently there. But speaking on actor, I think the next film that makes sense to go to is Benny Safdie's The Smashing Machine,
right,
which premiered a couple of weeks ago at the box office, and after its Venice premiere,
right,
and well, before we talk about its performance at the box office, very quickly, we saw the film right when it premiered here.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that I quite like the film. I think that the film felt very immersive to me. It felt very sensitive to me. Had a very sensitive touch from Benny Safdie. I think if you're expecting sort of an Uncut Gems, sort of Safdie energy, you're going to be disappointed, because the film has a much softer sort of gaze.
Mm-hmm.
But I quite liked that. And I think it felt very authentic. I think it was very, particular in its focus. It didn't feel like a, typical sports movie, go from, one fight in the ring to another fight in the ring, leading to the ultimate fight in the ring. It felt much more like a character piece. And certainly dissecting, the sort of messy interior as to, the men that are part of this MMA world, and, the psychological and emotional investment that goes into putting your body into this sort of turmoil, and the psychological effects of being in this sport, in this world, in this turmoil. So in that sense, I thought it was quite an effective piece. I was quite surprised. I quite like Benny Safdie, and I like the Safdies together. But I didn't expect such a sensitive approach. And I was quite happy about that. I sort of understood why Alexander Payne's jury gave it the Best Director prize, and why it appealed to them. That win, I thought, gave me the impression that this was a film that was going to play well to Academy voters. And after seeing it, I still feel like it's a film that would play well to Academy voters. I think The Rock is quite impressive in it, to be honest. I think he has a very nuanced and layered performance in the film that we certainly haven't seen from him. And certainly, there's a depth to his portrayal and his commitment that I was impressed by. And I also will say I was even more impressed, and we were talking about it, with Emily Blunt, because Emily Blunt had a lot of criticism. I mean, her character in the film has a lot of criticism from critics, that she's underdeveloped, and, that, there was just a lot of things being written about her and her character. But I will say that I thought Emily Blunt added a lot of layers to her performance. She's the more seasoned of the two, and I think that's quite evident when you see the film. She's a much smaller part than Mark Kerr is, obviously, but every time she was on the screen, I felt that she was adding layers to this woman's story that were effective and quite deep. And yes, I think overall the character is underwritten. But I was quite impressed with her, I have to be honest. I think it was a lot of richness to her portrayal. So this was a film that you and I were quite confident was going to do really well. And that sort of changed. But before we go into that, what did you think of the film?
Well, I really enjoyed the film as well, and I echo everything that you said. And I think it's tremendously performed by Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt, and really precisely captured. I think Benny did a very good job for a solo outing, and I think it stands out from the other Safdie films, and I mean that as a compliment. I think the biggest issue is really its script. Does it need to exist if the documentary's out there? I think that's a valid argument. But I think, I think it's a good film to leave towards the end of our discussion, along with the next film we'll talk about, because I feel like there's enough strength in the piece in and of itself that if you watch it as a screener and you ignore the noise, right, it's going to stand out. And The Rock is certainly going to get the nominations that the performance deserves along the way, even if he may fall short of the final 5 nomination. That being said, there could just be enough passion for what he does in it to make the final 5. I think Christopher Nolan shouted out the performance there today. And it just goes to show you that voters may see the poor reception it got from audiences, and that may just motivate them all the more to want to single it out. Looking at it through the lens of a voter, the work is there. The precision is there. The surprise, the transformation is there. And I think it's in both of them. I think Emily Blunt is always going to benefit from being a real person, which is something that they like to include. Yeah. I don't see Emily Blunt getting in without Dwayne Johnson.
She can't get in without him.
I can see Dwayne Johnson getting in without Emily Blunt because she was there so recently. And I can see them both getting in together as a package. I can definitely see the film very unlikely that it misses makeup. Fantastic work, right? So it seems to me like that's a for sure thing that's going to happen. The other thing that we were sort of pegging for the Smashing Machine at one point to even make it to Best Picture is that you should usually see someone who wins an award in Venice. Lately, you've seen one of those films score a Best Picture nomination. I don't think the Smashing Machine is going to be able to do that. So certainly I don't think Benny is, very firmly in the conversation for director, nor do I think it's in the firm conversation for picture. But the elements that are absolutely irresistible about it, Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, the makeup, I think all those are still firmly in position to steal that nomination. It's just a matter of going from, second, third, or fourth to clearly fighting for fifth. But if you turn the film on, you will be impressed.
Right.
So it's really only a question of, do you have something stronger to vote for, something you're more passionate about?
Right.
And again, this is, I think, a motif that will appear in the final 2 films, but the idea that it has been overlooked could be as powerful as it had been a success.
Right. But I do want to mention that for a second, which is, again, you and I felt very confident that the film was going to do extremely well for, the mass audience, because The Rock tends to carry, a hefty amount of, mass audience to go and check out his film.
Right.
And that wrestling, or rather, sports biopics that have to do with, MMA fighting or wrestling, it's a topic that I think taps into something that a lot of audiences want to see. We were seeing a surprise hit with the Iron Claw from A24 as well. which made us think, well, if the Iron Claw can do better than expected, but now you put The Rock in, and now you have these Venice headlines of him, being, you can't miss this performance because of the transformation. And then added to that, the general audience that The Rock tends to carry anyway, that this was a film set to do extremely well. And I think the predictions were extremely high for it. And the fact when it didn't do so well, I am really surprised. I was really surprised. And I asked myself, why? Why didn't it do better? You can see films and you can understand, oh, well, thematically it's complex, or, it's just not what's making money right now. But a film like this, why didn't it do the 20 million that it was supposed to do? That to me is really shocking, because I thought it had everything it needed to do 20 million.
I was surprised until I saw the movie. When I saw the movie, I understood why it did not make 20 million.
But wouldn't that be more in line with, word of mouth? So, okay, people start seeing the movie and people buy those tickets, and then, it falls off really fast. I don't think word of mouth. But it never even launched.
I don't think word of mouth. Yeah, I don't think it ever took off.
Right. But why?
I think it's largely due to the fact where if you're a Dwayne Johnson fan, you want to see a Dwayne Johnson film, not Dwayne Johnson subvert all the Dwayne Johnson about himself and give an authentic, moving, poignant performance. Right. And in a lot of ways, it's almost as unshowy as it is showy, because if his transformation is very showy, the script is absolutely not showy at all. It's almost, we talked about a documentary right? And so that's why Dwayne Johnson didn't go. And if you're asking a crowd that wants to go and watch Daniel Day-Lewis work, they're never really going to go and say, oh, well, then I have to go watch Dwayne Johnson, because he hasn't really sort of proved himself with that audience yet. And so after seeing the film, I understood why it didn't do well. I mean, I think we're also living in a time where hardly any film is doing well. We're, as we speak, the Black Phone 2 is coming out this weekend in the US, and it's doing well. It's going to make, I think 25. That's great. But the movie was at one point pegged for 40. Right. And if it was another year and another time and the world wasn't in the condition that it's in, maybe more people would be going to the movies. Right. But that's just not the case.
And even one of the biggest contenders this year, one bad after another, is, losing money for Warner Brothers, because it's such a high price tag.
Absolutely.
Even though it's doing really well. I mean, even though it's doing well and respectable, and certainly critically, it's doing phenomenally. And it's, has some legs. It's still not where it needs to be in order to meet profit.
Yes, I just don't think that that's the reality we're living in. As long as this is our political reality, our economic reality, our cultural reality. So again, my big point here is that if you're an Oscar voter and you look at it through the lens of what do I want to nominate, there's enough work here throughout. And I really do think the pivot here for the campaign is, okay, the nomination is a way to get more people to watch the movie. And if people think it's worthwhile and they applaud, Dwayne Johnson not doing his regular thing, then that's an excellent reason to put it in fifth. You know what I mean? Same thing with Emily Blunt, even though, again, I don't think Emily Blunt can get in without Dwayne Johnson. And so I think that's where I'm at with this movie. I definitely am not someone. I think I've always had the mentality where, you have your critic screening, your press screening, you have your first festival screening, then you have your major general audience screening. No movie is ever out, and I think we've seen demonstrations of that all the time, whether it's, Stanley Tucci and the Lovely Bones, or Jennifer Aniston in Cake, or Tommy Lee Jones for In the Valley of the Law. You do this long enough, you realize no movie is ever out, just the board shrinks and the campaign, their path to getting a nomination narrows. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just more narrow. Right. But if you can campaign the right way, you can still turn that into a successful nomination. And I think among the people we're talking about, the Smashing Machine is right there. The work is there. It's just a matter of reframing the narrative.
Right. And that brings us to another film that sadly underperformed at the box office very recently, which was Bill Condon's Kiss of the Spider Woman, which you and I both saw at Sundance way back in January. That feels like 2 years ago. It unfortunately had a very poor performance, even though it had I think a very more than decent performance with critics. I think it's 79 on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it's 66 on Metacritic. This was a film that people were unsure of how it was going to land critically. And I think by and large, it's landed really well, really solid critically. I think if you look at the Letterboxd scores for the film, there's a lot of passion behind the film. If you look at the Twitter, there's a lot of passion behind the film as well. But that passion has turned into, this is such a, this is such a good movie. Please go see it in theaters, because it's not having the audience reception that we would have hoped. And it's quite a shame, really, because the film is quite timely. If you see the film, with the communities that are being targeted, the LGBTQ community, with its exploration of trans issues in a way that I think is very bold, with its sort of it delves into, being targeted because you disagree with the government, political prisoners, has 3 Latino leads, which is not something that we see often at all in a film, and especially a major release theatrically. It's a serious musical that's combining all this sort of political charge with, at the same time, this really lush MGM musical 1940s 1950s world. It's really well done. I think it's one of Bill Condon's best films in a long time. I think it's spectacularly crafted with great performances. And so in a way, it's quite sad that it's not finding the audience, and that roadside attractions and Lionsgate and LD haven't been able to conjure up that audience for it in the US. And that certainly, I think it was a film that was positioned quite well in categories like supporting actress and costume design. And I think those categories are taking a hit right now because of the audience reception.
The box office reception.
The box office reception.
That's one thing that's apparent to me is, if you look at the Metacritic score for The Smashing Machine, audience is not crazy about it.
Yeah.
That's not the same with Kiss of the Spider Woman. The people who are going to show up, who are showing up to watch it, are actually enjoying it.
Yeah.
Just the number of people who are showing up is substantially lower than they thought. Yeah. Which, again, in the current climate we're living in, I think we need to start learning to underestimate what movies are going to do. The same way that it doesn't make sense for Black Phone to come out and make 40,
Or Tron Ares was supposed to make
Tron
like 50.
Ares is another one supposed to make 50. And so, like, barring Avatar, Wicked, Zootopia 2, we should probably peg down our predictions for every film by maybe 35, possibly 45%. That's just the reality we're living in. And again, there's a bunch of reasons for it. But again, I think it's a huge shame that it didn't find a wider audience. I hope it finds a wider audience in the future. I think if you haven't seen it, it's so worth seeing it on the big screen. I even went to revisit it. I saw it at Sundance, but I revisited on the big screen here. It was a really great screen, and it's so worth the price of admission. The musical sequences alone just completely pop. And again, critics have been really, we're living in a reality where the truth is, as much as they're eliminated from Best Picture contention, Smashing Machine and Kiss of the Spider Woman, and those are the two of the more sad cases. The final two, that's I think why we left them for last, is because there's so much work in both films and so much successful elements in them. Right now, they're outpacing the critical reception for Jay Kelly.
Yeah.
And Jay Kelly is still a contender. And sometimes that happens. Don't Look Up, is still nominated for Best Picture. And maybe Jay Kelly will be nominated for Best Picture also. But just to give you an idea of where the films have landed thus far after, being widely reviewed by critics, Jay Kelly is an inferior movie to both of these titles.
Right.
Critically at least. To be fair, we're going to see it. We're going to have a discussion on it. More critics are going to see Jay Kelly, so maybe it takes off. But the point is just that, due to the box office woes of both these movies, they're probably not going to come as close to Best Picture contention as Jay Kelly is. which is unfortunate because they have the work to, possibly compete alongside Jay Kelly. To just their circumstances have given them a little bit of a hit. But again, like I said, I think the board shrinks. I don't think you burn the board or you say there's no route. I think it's a really beautiful, interesting parallel here because we're talking Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, and makeup. And the work is there if you put the screener on. And I'm going to say it mirrors exactly the same situation with Kiss of the Spider Woman. Tonya 2, Jennifer Lopez, costume design. The work is there if you put the screener on, right?
Right.
And there's an argument that exists that its lack of success could be motivation enough to want to champion it. Because if anyone's going to benefit from the Oscar bump of being nominated and finding a little bit more of an audience, it would be both of these two movies that suffered in their initial release.
Right.
I think that no matter what, much like the makeup nomination for Smashing Machine, I think the costume design nomination for Kiss of the Spider Woman is very likely to happen.
When you see the film, it feels almost like, can this not happen for costume design? It's crazy, but
it's a stretch.
Right. But I do wonder if, being hit with this low box office performance, that's something that obvious and something that, bulletproof can lose out just by mere fact of poor box office performance.
It's a possibility. But like the makeup work from an Oscar-winning team for the Smashing Machine, that is just so well done if you watch the movie. And maybe it benefits that it's going to be in a bake-off as opposed to costume design, which isn't going to have a bake-off. You have to actually watch the movie, right? But here again, you have the legendary Colleen Atwood. She's one of the designers on it. And again, if you see the movie, the costumes are absolutely brilliant in it. In not just certainly in the musical scenes, but also in its counterpoint of the prison scenes. And the ending sequence is just ridiculous. And so again, I just find it hard to believe that the precision and the creativity of that is going to be overlooked. And I also don't think we have the most competitive field, but regardless of that, I feel like that nomination is still very much in the offing.
I wonder if that last spot for costume design is really a battle between, Colleen Atwood for Kiss of the Spider Woman or Marty Supreme, who's a costume designer who's actually never been nominated yet by the Academy.
Right.
Or if the Academy would go so far as to say, I want to nominate Colleen Atwood because she's done great work this year, but maybe I don't want to nominate her for this film that underperformed. So instead, I'll do a really strange nomination for One Battle After Another.
No, there's no way I think that One Battle can get in there. And I think maybe something like Ann Lee can maybe try to make a move here. But even then, I'm not even sure the costumes in Hamnet are going to come close to what, the costume designers achieved on Kiss of the Spider Woman. And so, again, this is another one where I feel like this nomination is very much still in the offing.
And another category that really made perfect sense for this film was supporting actress, not just because Jennifer Lopez has yet to be recognized for a 35-plus year in her career in film, but, it's a period piece, it's musicals. Bill Condon has actually done really well in this space with a musical contender and supporting actress. And actually, that category has been really, really, really kind to supporting actresses in musicals.
Yeah.
And, it's a legacy project, with Chita Rivera's name behind it, and Candor and Ebb and a prestigious Broadway musical. And so just, if you look at the supporting actress category, Jennifer Lopez made perfect sense for this quintet. And we feel very strongly about it. But now we feel like Jennifer is going to be fighting for that, last spot.
Right.
Because of the poor box office performance, which is, again, a big shame. But it's also strange because if you really look at the landscape of Best Supporting Actors, and you look at the contenders, it really feels like it's a spot that she makes almost the most sense to get, that fifth spot. But now I think it's a little bit more confusing as to what's going to happen there.
Right, I agree. I think it follows the footsteps of Dwayne Johnson with the unfortunate, an element that, Roadside Attractions is not a
Right.
24
Right.
and it's not a real person. But I do think that it's certainly a performance. And again, if you put the screener on, the work is there, and it's a career where it's still very much in the hunt for the fifth spot. It's just the idea that the board has shrunk in terms of what you need to do to get it to, you know, to squeeze it out at the end, to sneak
Right.
off of that
Right.
nomination at the end.
Right.
But again, the category has a lot of, downsides,
It's very volatile.
It's very volatile. I mean, you have Glenn Close, which is perfect, but it's a Knives Out movie. You have Amy Madigan, has a lot of fans, but it's Weapons. It's a horror movie. You have Ariana Grande, but she was just nominated. You have a bunch of One Battle Girls, but they're all of them are in the same movie, which happens to be the same studio for Woodme. So it's an extremely volatile category, and so to a certain degree, Jennifer Lopez doesn't lose the aspect of, she's a veteran and she's never been nominated. Roadside has nothing else to campaigning, right?
Right.
And so those elements don't necessarily go away, which bode well for her. Because if you look at someone like Elle Fanning, even Elle Fanning has to technically sort of compete against Inga, right? Even she's not the only neon girl. And so like Emily Blunt, the same way that Emily Blunt benefited from all these names that we're saying because she's real, right? There's no one else real.
Right.
There's still very much a path, and it can still very much happen. And I would not dismiss it from happening. It's just a matter of, again, there's just less moves you can make.
It took a big hit.
It took a big hit, but I don't think, like the Smashing Machine, I don't think it's a death blow. I think it's just a challenge.
Right. But I wonder, some people were saying online about the film possibly getting a second wind if somehow it were to land on a streamer.
I heard
that
about
could be
that.
something that is a plus for its campaign, possibly.
I actually think that's a really smart idea. And I actually think that's a decision that would be made not just by Roadside, but really by the financiers of the film. Because I think both films, Smashing Machine and Kiss of Spider-Woman, who actually, it's a fantastic movie to double feature. If you haven't seen either of them yet, you should double feature them because they're both fantastic films. And I think this is one of Bill Condon's top 3 films. And certainly the idea that this film made less money than Beauty and the Beast and may get less nominations than Beauty and the Beast is hurtful, is as a sad, depressing fact, possibly, if that were to happen. But I guess I want to just emphasize that idea that these are films that were misjudged in their financing, misjudged in the audience, and then finally, were misjudged by the release. Both movies probably should have been released platform and gone from 500 theaters to 800 to 1,000, probably capped off at 1,500, and they probably would have been much more successful. I understand that strategy would have been more realistic had they not been financed for 35 and 50 apiece.
Yeah.
And, whatever efforts the companies made to try to, get the ball rolling on them, it was never going to be as powerful as, getting that first initial audience to go and watch it and be impressed by it. An actual audience in a theater, not a critics or press audience or a festival-going audience, which is not the general movie-going public. Which, again, simply cannot afford to watch that many movies in today's political climate, economic climate.
Right.
And so I think that they're both sister pieces. And I think that being that is the case, I think that we have not heard the last on either film. And I think Jennifer Lopez and Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, and Tonya 2.
Yeah,
I mean,
we have to talk a little bit about Tonya 2.
It's so difficult to think that Tonya 2 at the end of the day isn't going to be listed so often amongst the year's critics as one of the best performances and one of the best performances in the best actor category. So he's going to be a critic's darling, right? Because he just does an incredible job. And again, if you see the film, it's an incredible performance, and it's already an Oscar-nominated Oscar-winning performance from William Hurt, right? And I think
it's really hard to see him not get, for example, a Golden Globe nomination.
Oh my gosh, yes,
and so like, I'm confused. Like, how much does that change because of box office? Does it remain the same because, again, the contender is strong, or does that change completely because
I
of
really
box
doubt
office?
that it would change. I really doubt that it would change for both of them because of the work that's there, much the same way that I would doubt that it changes much for the actors in the Smashing Machine. I think Tona has a really interesting element here, and we talked about it after, which is, and no one really talks about it, but the best actor category is unkind to men in musicals.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so on top of it being a new actor, top of it being a Latino actor, top of it being, a film that didn't connect with an audience at the box office, you have that idea that just, it's very difficult to be competing in the best actor race as a musical.
Yeah.
And certainly, as one of your first big roles. And it's sort of like, you won't see that happen for actors. If you had one of your first big roles, like Rachel Zegler, for example. I'm not saying Rachel Zegler makes it in, but I'm saying that among some of the bigger awards, she got a little bit more cred, or will maybe get more cred than Tona, because it's just not masculine enough to be the man leading a musical.
Yeah.
Even though so few men can actually do it.
Yeah.
It's not just that they have trouble getting into Best Actor; they have trouble existing altogether in the cinematic landscape.
Right.
And they have it's not every actor who will actually do that.
Right.
Leo's one of our best actors, incredible actor. Never been in a musical.
Daniel Day-Lewis tried.
Daniel Day-Lewis tried. Right. And again, that's why Daniel Day-Lewis is Daniel Day-Lewis, right?
But it's also evident that it's one of his weakest films.
And it's one of his weakest films and one of his weaker performances. It's not better than Tona's performance, for example. But you have to just say that idea that at least he was willing to say, as an actor, I can be the lead actor of a musical. And a man can do that, right? An actor can do that. And so I do think that that's something going against Tona, which is really unfortunate. I wish more people would talk about it, because that's an important thing to talk about. Is I'm really curious as to how many performances men, actors have gotten in for Best Actor by themselves without their counterpart, if that makes sense. I know Richard Gere didn't get in for a whole mess of reasons, but can't think of the last musical performance that got nominated in Best Actor. And so that's something that I'm aware of also, and that he has to fight against. But I think the work is there. And so I don't think
can Roadside get voters to see it.
Right. But so back again to that
when they couldn't get audiences to see it.
So back again to that idea of a misjudged release. If this does go to streaming, and I think it will, I think that's the smart thing to do, there's a chance that it finds a wider audience there and it gets a second wind. And I remember, for example, when Roadside, I think it was Roadside, I think it might have been Roadside Vertical collaboration, when they took Emily the Criminal to Netflix, and people started watching it and talking about it, and that was great. And Aubrey Plaza should have been, deeper in the conversation for Best Actors that year.
She was great.
She's fantastic in that film. And so I think something like that would benefit the film and could certainly still happen.
Right. But it would have to depend on who has the streaming rights. Right. So we don't know yet. Does Roadside have it? Does Artist Equity have it? We're not sure.
Right. And even then, again, Roadside was able to, I think, broker that deal for Emily the Criminal.
That's true.
And so it's not whoever.
And Netflix has a relationship with Jennifer Lopez.
That's right. That's another thing going for it, right? And they've had success with Emilia Perez. Right. And so it's something that may be mutually beneficial, and that the movie would probably do well to sort of take advantage of.
But I also will say, just as a final note, I do wonder, you bring up a lot of excellent points, but I wonder if this film had been a streaming film and avoided the box office, that might have affected its critical reception a little bit, because I think a lot of critics were, a little bit more open-minded, because it was a film that was trying to be made for theaters. but I do wonder if, being able to avoid, the sort of box office performance would have really helped the movie, especially one, for example, Netflix has a terrific trajectory of getting their supporting actresses in to supporting actors. And in fact, this year is one of the more puzzling years. The only year they haven't been able to do it ever since they started with Mudbound was, oddly enough, 2022. And they were really struggling that year, and they had to pivot to All Quiet on the Western Front to land the Best Picture nomination. But besides that year, they've always gotten into supporting actors, and this year they really have only got Glenn Close in the Knives Out film and Rebecca Ferguson in A House of Dynamite, and we've seen A House of Dynamite. It's not going to contend for acting awards.
I disagree.
I know that
note, Idris Elba, watch out for Idris Elba.
I think that it will not contend for any acting nominations. I think just the film doesn't resonate in that way. Even though I thought Rebecca Ferguson was great. I think she gave the best performance in the piece. But anyway, I don't think that there's a performance there that's going to be highlighted for voters. So it's really up to Glenn Close. So again, could things have been different had it been a streamer? I don't know.
I mean, it's certainly an interesting idea, but I also say, unfortunately, you should watch the film on the big screen. It deserves the big screen, and it was made for the big screen. But unfortunately, U.S. audiences, you kind of get what you pay for. And so it's very tough to be sad about quality movies going to streaming when U.S. audiences aren't really making the argument that they're really going to show up. And so they've sort of made the argument that we're not going to show up for Smash Machine or Kiss of the Spider Woman, then we're just gonna keep getting dumb movies. Like, I don't know what Final Destination we're in, and I'm not a Final Destination hater, but Final Destination, when the audience says that that's what I want to see, and when critics say that movie is a 70 whatever on Metacritic, there's up is down and down is up, and you can't go crying about why all these things are going to streaming when you're not really doing your part in sort of saying that they belong in the theater.
Yeah, 100%.
And you're not doing your part maybe as a critic saying that this is what the theater is for.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you completely.
So it's unfortunate. It's really a loss, I think, like I said, for audiences. So if you get a chance to watch them, I would say if you double feature them, you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and please watch them.
Yeah. And pleasantly surprised, and I think you're gonna actually enjoy your time.
I feel like we're in sad times right now with the box office, with theaters. It's a really sad time,
and it's also just tough out there. Again, just politically, economically, it's just tough to go to the movies right now. And so I'm glad we ended with those two movies because I do think that of the ones we're talking about, those are the ones that I think are still very much deep in the hunt. They're just not hunting for spots 1, 2, or 3 anymore. They're just clearly hunting for spots 4 and 5. And that nonetheless, I would be shocked if they're not Academy Award nominated films.
In some degree.
To some degree, like I said, I feel very confident about the makeup nomination, and I feel very confident about the costume design nomination.
Right. And so, we'll next talk about the New York Film Festival, which just wrapped up. We've been to the New York Film Festival. We love the New York Film Festival. It's sort of kind of categorized as like, America's Cannes, which I think is nice, even though there were some weird choices this year.
That's what I was going to say.
There were some weird, puzzling choices.
Everyone should check out the New York Film Festival, best film festival in the U.S. It's very much, that's really kind of their agenda, is to be the American Cannes. Picking out the best American festival, which is great. That's awesome. Sometimes they do their job very well. Sometimes they do their job questionably. And this was one of those years. And it starts with After the Hunt getting, panned at Venice, and then deciding that that's the movie that needs to open the New York Film Festival.
Right.
Which again, I'm going to make the argument that if you watch it when it comes out on streaming, certainly not a film you have to watch in the theaters. If you watch it, that there's something going on in the actual film. If you read it between the lines as to why it would make an interesting opening for the New York Film Festival.
Right. Well, I will also say Amazon might have a hand there because their films tend to as of late get a New York Film Festival spot.
Of course. But you also have like a bunch of films that went to New York. We're not going to go through the entire lineup, just the really important stuff. But again, Jay Kelly went. That's sort of been polar divisive reception between Venice and Telluride.
I think it did well in Telluride. I didn't do so well at Venice. And again, not so well at New York.
That's what I'm saying. New York tends to do a little bit more solid, really well-liked films from the cinephile sphere that show up there. I think that maybe, and again, it's just a sign of the times we're in, there's maybe a little bit of pressure on the festival and needs to maybe perform a little bit better in terms of ticket sales. And that's why you have Julia Roberts opening the film festival, and you have maybe Adam Sandler there with George Clooney. Of course, they love Noah Baumbach anyway. But I'm sure all those things help. And so those films went. House of Dynamite went, did not have the reception it was looking for. Great to see If I Had Legs at Kick You went there, and it's about to come out. I think it's already out in select theaters. It's going to expand.
It comes out.
I think one of the big events to actually talk about is just Jafar Panahi was able to go.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he had a discussion with Marty.
Yes, it's so
which,
great.
Looks amazing and it sounds amazing. And I think just goes to show you that It Was Just an Accident is a top 5 movie for Best Picture, Best Director, Screenplay, etc. I don't think enough people are paying attention. Like you and I have been discussing casting. Do not sleep on it for casting.
Do not sleep on it.
But it just goes to show you that his story just resonates with so many people in the industry, so many people who love movies, Jafar Panahi's. And so that's definitely going to happen this year. And that was, I think, a big takeaway for me is just how beloved that filmmaker is and how that movie is just poised for success and possibly poised for at least one big win. Right? Mastermind went. No Other Choice did well. Resurrection, Maria, Secret Agent did well. No surprise there. Surratt did really well. Sound of Falling. Magellan did well. So a lot of really interesting films. I think the thing that we should talk about the most, though, is, the premieres. And so on the main slate section, let's talk about the closing night film, right? And I'm actually glad we're talking about these films, the 2 movies to talk about the most, because something really interesting happened that I think is really shady and petty. And you know me, I love the pettiness. I live for the pettiness. But Fox Searchlight goes ahead. Fox Searchlight, Disney Searchlight or Searchlight went ahead and announced that they had acquired Ann Lee finally just right before Bradley Cooper's new film premiered at New York.
Right.
I didn't think it was a great move. I wouldn't like the move if I was a collaborator with Searchlight, because it sort of just kind of announces that
we don't have faith in this.
We don't have faith in this movie. Certainly not the faith that we had in Rental Family. That's why we didn't announce the acquisition then, or that's why we didn't, skyrocket the deal in our terms of our priority list.
Took a while.
Then it took a while for them to finally say, we don't really have anything.
Yeah, because the Brutalist was 3 days after Venice. This was like a month and a half after Venice.
They basically, it took a while for someone to say we don't have anything, and it makes sense for it to be Searchlight because they're not going to be as exhausted as Sony Classics, which is just Sony and Sony Classics, and certainly not Mubi, which doesn't have anything but its own streaming service. Don't forget Searchlight is now part of Disney, and so they have deeper pockets. And so it makes sense that it's Searchlight. But I didn't think it was a great move for them to do that to Bradley Cooper. And so the film premiered, and it seems like it did well. I think audiences liked it. I think it ended the festival on a high note. Very much New York story. A lot of people championing the performances. What Will Arnett does, what Laura Dern does. Yeah. I think a lot of people also sort of surprised. It's a little bit more of a low-key Bradley Cooper movie. And I think if you're someone who loves, high-key Bradley Cooper, maybe it's not going to be your cup of tea. But if you're someone who's not big on high-key Bradley Cooper, like I myself am not, then it certainly sounds like something you're going to want to check out. And so the film, I think, was met, pretty well. Pretty solid by critics and I think viewers. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem like it has the package to go the distance in any particular category at the Academy. I mean, certainly something to look out for at the Golden Globes.
It certainly feels like a very much Will Arnett and Laura Dern will get nominated at the Golden Globes.
Maybe the WGA with all their, ineligibilities,
Right.
could still factor in there. Even Will Arnett at the SAG, because he rarely gets an opportunity to lead a film.
Right.
That could still happen. And but I just feel like this is the kind of film where if it's gonna get any traction, like had it premiered at Sundance and had the same reception, if it's gonna get any traction, it's because their studio distributor is absolutely committed to them.
Yeah.
And with their announcement, it just shows that Searchlight is not committed at all.
Yeah.
And that they're going to throw their weight behind Ann Lee.
Right.
We have a great article on the website, framesandflicker.com, talking about how the Ann Lee acquisition is really mirroring what they did in 2016 with Jackie, which actually ended up being the last time that they were snubbed from Best Picture altogether.
Yeah.
So that's not who you want to model yourself after.
And again, it's the comparisons are striking because Jackie's an incredible movie and it had very good critical reception and really underperformed. It's a film that could have easily been nominated for Best Picture in terms of quality.
You would think, yeah.
But it was not. It was only nominated for 3 awards. It won nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel Ann Lee is mirroring it quite
in a problematic way if you're Searchlight. But so then as this thing ends up premiering, and we're gonna keep an eye on it, and I think we're gonna be able to screen it soon. But definitely doesn't look like it's gonna be a major Oscar player in any category. But look out for it in those some of those televised awards. At this point it would need a huge box office haul, and again, people just can't afford.
And
to
I wonder if that's a missed opportunity, because as you were saying, actress, we need a veteran actor there. And you have Laura Dern, who could fill that spot.
Yeah.
If you are savvy enough and you're pushing a film, if you're pushing your film.
Exactly. I think that would have been a great case. And she had 2 movies this year. Yeah. So had she been in better movies, you would think, well, Laura Dern has been nominated for lead actress since Rambling Rose. Yep. So perfect scenario to put her back in lead. But I think more people are. I think people are also celebrating Will Arnett's turn because it's very uncharacteristic, and I think it was also very moving. Yeah. So that premiered. Anemone premiered. We've discussed that already. Very divisive. And again, it was a weird year for New York Film Festival, and it just seemed to me like they needed to do everything they could to beef up ticket sales. I don't think they got the best films. I think they got some really good films. And some great films from Cannes, but I don't think they got the best films from the other festivals. And I think they needed more marquee names, but they did have what is again probably a huge premiere for the fall, which is they ended up having Marty Supreme as the secret screening.
Right, and I will say that I think most people felt that just that screening alone kind of made it the fall festival.
And I will say that maybe then what happened was that they blew their budget on getting Marty Supreme to play there. I think supposedly the idea is that Josh was really racing to finish the film in time, that he finished the mix or something like an hour before it showed.
Right.
And so that was part of the story, a part of the narrative.
Let's also say part of that, in the vein of that pettiness that you were talking about, which is sort of weird that, the Smashing Machine had just underperformed at the box office. And then A24 just goes ahead and says, well, never mind. This is a real horse.
Exactly.
Right here, Marty Supreme.
So after, everyone has to talk about, the Dwayne Johnson, the box office, and the Smashing Machine, and how could that ever happen, and what went wrong, and all of that. Then you have A24 saying, and the secret screening is going to be Marty, and it's clearly going to be the movie we're going to prioritize, the Safdie we're going to prioritize. And so again, like the move against Bradley Cooper, again, if I was Benny Safdie and or if he was as immature as me, I certainly wouldn't take my next movie to A24. Over there, you know, people are taking a photo of me. I'm taking a photo of myself with the sandwich board saying, come and watch my movie.
Right.
And then your brother's movie basically, I think, sells out in 15 minutes at the New York Film Festival.
Right.
And they couldn't even get you a spot, you know, on the spotlight section or something,
Right.
or screen you at Film
Right.
Lincoln Center. I have no idea, but
And also weird that, you know, Benny won Best Director at Venice and there was no mention of Josh, and
right.
Josh didn't mention Benny at all
Right.
during the, you know, and again, we have no idea what.
But I'll tell you what,
what's there, but
if I think the most professional thing is let the Safdies do whatever it is that they have to do in terms of omit whoever they want to in their speeches
Right.
and in their, you know, in their expression of gratitude. But as the parent, if you're A24, you should not really select between your children.
right.
At least you shouldn't make it that obvious.
Yeah.
Like, fine, you have a favorite child, but you don't announce it to the world
Right.
that, okay, you know, this is my favorite kid.
Right.
And so anyway, Marty Supreme premieres
Through the roof.
So 17 minutes sold out. Josh is there to introduce it. Chalamet's there to introduce it. Cast is there. Plays really well. And, you know, people absolutely adore it.
And there was
after it finishes.
there was a really funny gag on Twitter
That's
of like,
right, yeah.
this is, you know, this meets this meets this.
Yeah.
And then people ran with it. And there was one that was like, this is
That was
Precious.
great, yeah.
Precious meets
Coach Carter.
Coach Carter meets Dudley
Yeah.
Doolittle meets.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. But obviously people were very excited about it. And I think it got a tremendous reception. And I think that alone was enough to make it a worthwhile New York Film Festival. I'm not sure the last time they've had a secret screening that was that big. I think I've always had the caveat, and I've mentioned it in our updated predictions, just the idea that, you know, the screening sold out in 17 minutes. I was skeptical. I thought it would be Ann Lee because it had just been acquired, and I thought it made sense for Searchlight to make that move. But people started talking about in film Twitter how, you know, press was being told that they were under embargo and they couldn't write reviews for it, just social media reactions, which kind of already shows you that whoever it's going to be, it's first of all, it's going to be a new movie. Second, that they're not afraid as to what the social media reaction is going to be, and that they want that word of mouth. And I will say that, let's be honest, that screening was full of Safdie fans and moviegoers that enjoy A24 films, that enjoy the New York Film Festival, that enjoy A24 films, and that enjoy Safdie films.
Yeah.
And that probably see Uncut Gems as, you know, the Citizen Kane of the last 10 years, right? And that's not necessarily Oscar voters.
Right.
So I will say that, to me, I'm still very much debating as to how well it's going to perform with Oscar voters who are more stuffy, right? We know already that they don't like Safdie movies because they have never nominated a Safdie movie.
Right.
So, you know, whichever Safdie movie gets nominated this time, even if it's makeup for Smashing Machine, that'll be the first nomination that a Safdie film has ever gotten.
Right.
And so I do think you have to take that into consideration. This was not the crowd you were trying to win over.
Right.
This isn't the Venice crowd. This isn't the crowd from Cannes. This isn't the crowd from Telluride. Remember when they went to Telluride with Uncut Gems? Yeah. Absolutely. The crowd was not into it at all.
Right.
And so this was not the crowd that you were testing. At the same time, you know, credit to A24 for understanding that I'm not going to take it to Telluride this year. I would rather take it to New York.
That was very smart.
Very smart. Not the same smarts they had for Smashing Machine release, but yes, very smart to take it to New York Film Festival. So it's still very much a question in the air, I think, as to will voters be as impressed. But even if they're not, it's very clear that A24 has nothing else.
Right.
That this is what they've got to push.
Their big push.
Their big push, you know, by process of elimination. I mean, they really put themselves in a position where they have nothing else to choose from.
Right. But I also will say that, you know, we're unsure how much the Academy, to what extent they're willing to embrace the Safdie brothers. But I will say that I do feel that they're at a moment in their career that they have an esteem amongst, cinephiles, and many filmmakers are cinephiles. That look back at a film like Uncut Gems and look back at it fondly, and look back at it as a film that deserved more recognition than it got, and look back at their other films like Heaven Knows What, Good Time, and have a lot of respect for what they do. So I think it's no question that it's only a matter of time before the Safdie brothers break through with the Academy. And this seems to be a year where that would happen, with two Safdie projects sort of dueling each other in a way, that they're destined to be embraced by the Academy at some point. Like you, I question to what degree. And usually the pattern that we see at the Academy is that when a filmmaker starts to sort of amass, when they start embracing a filmmaker into the fold, it happens like little by little.
Yeah.
It happens, they get one or two nominations, and then the next time they get even more nominations. So, for example, look at Joachim Trier, who had already broken through with Worst Person in the World in 2021 and got a screenplay nomination. People were really happy about that. And now he's going to get a Best Picture nomination and a Best Director nomination.
Yeah.
And so that sort of, gradual transition exists for a lot of filmmakers.
It's more typical.
Right. Instead of like, boom, you go from 0 to 10.
Look at Sean Baker.
Look at Sean Baker, who went from having one nomination for the Florida Project, having at least some sort of presence, and then eventually getting the 6 nominations for Honora and winning Best Picture.
Right.
It's rare for it to happen, a complete 180, 0 to a bunch. It did happen last year, for example, with Brady Corbet.
Yeah.
A filmmaker they hadn't embraced yet. And then all of a sudden get 10 nominations. But I'll also say that people like Brady Corbet and people like Barry Jenkins, who are able to manage such a big transition from being completely not present to being omnipresent in a way. It feels like those films were like introductions to the film, to the Academy, and that helped the transition, as opposed to, I guess, the feeling that the Academy is already aware of the Safdie brothers,
right?
To some degree, and so it's more about finally accepting him into the group.
No, I agree, and I think you're pointing to a great example. I think that The Brutalist and Moonlight, for example, demonstrated an amount of maturity that I'm not sure is going to be there in Marty Supreme yet. And it starts with ideas where, like, you have the stunt casting of Kevin O'Leary, who people say is excellent in the film.
Yeah, excellent.
And he looked excellent in the trailer.
Yeah,
so I'm not totally
thought,
surprised.
Yeah,
right?
He did.
But I will say that there's that idea that it's maybe a little bit easier to widely recognize Corbet and Barry Jenkins because they're not doing something so risky as casting Kevin O'Leary.
Yeah, but I will also say, it's very, as you're saying, there's a reason why Brady Corbet gets accepted, quote unquote, with The Brutalist and not accepted with Vox Lux.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Absolutely.
Right. And, I will add that some people are saying that this is, very Safdie, but at the same time, like, much more palatable, much more accessible, much more, I think people were saying that's sort of a crowd pleaser.
Which would help.
It would help. And it's certainly not the first thing you think of when you think of a Safdie films, a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're hearing other reactions like, this is Uncut Gems dialed to 10 to 20.
Yes.
So then which one is it? Which one is it, A or B? Because it can't be both.
I'm not sure it can be both. And I'm not sure that Uncut Gems dialed to 10 is gonna do the trick.
Right.
But, if we look at just the idea that A24 is going to get someone into Best Picture, it basically has to be Marty Supreme at this point.
Yeah.
It's well received. Some people are talking about the idea that it's going to be a massive movie to get possibly even double digit nominations. A24 has only done that twice.
Right.
That's Everything Everywhere All at Once, which won Best Picture, and last year's The Brutalist, right? Which scored 10.
Right.
I'm not sure that the piece, again, has the maturity to get double nominations. First of all, I haven't seen it, but it's difficult for me to accept the idea that it's in the actual hunt to win.
Right.
I think I'd need to see, really good box office numbers for me to start thinking that. Again, just the idea that it's very difficult for your film, for someone who hasn't been embraced yet to go in and all of a sudden win Best Picture. And so I think that hurts the idea of double nominations.
And also, we don't know yet how
Double-digit.
well it's going to do at the box office. I mean, people are saying that it's such a crowd pleaser, and certainly Timothée Chalamet is very hot right now. So that people are assuming that it's going to be a big success. I think it's A24's most expensive film to
Is that
date.
true?
I'm pretty sure I heard something like 90
That's
million.
risky.
I think.
No.
I think I heard something like that.
There's no way.
I think so.
Oh, we have to confirm that for next time.
And so the pressure's on to sort of meet that, bar, being A24's most expensive film. Is a Safdie film, at least the Safdie films that I know, are they meant to be 90 million grossing films? Not really.
Very difficult to see that happening. At the same time, again, just about that element of maturity and, typical Oscar tastes. Then they come out with the video promoting the film, which is great marketing for film Twitter. I'm not sure it's going to get, Whoopi Goldberg to say, I really have to go watch Marty Supreme now. You know what I mean? So I do wonder, again, if the energy is just a little bit youthful for the Academy, and if they're going to be able to get on the same wavelength. I think it helps that, again, it's A24's, only option. I think it helps that Timothée Chalamet is in a position where, like, can he even lose this after last year?
Yeah,
right?
I think Timothée Chalamet's candidacy is something that's really working in the favor for this film. Because if you look at, obviously, Oscar history, the Best Actor winner, their films tend to be nominated for Best Picture.
Traditionally.
It would be extremely strange when that doesn't happen. The last time it didn't happen was
The Whale.
Whale with Brendan Fraser, but there was a reason for that. I mean, that film was not received really well critically. Everything seems to suggest that this film will at least be received critically, well.
And it was probably really close too.
Yeah, it was probably like number 11.
Got the PGA tag.
Exactly, and it ended up winning 2 of its 3 Oscars. So a Best Actor winner has typically a film that gets nominated for Best Picture and is a serious contender. I think Timothée Chalamet stands the best chance to win because, quite simply, the feat of being able to go back to back and having 3 nominations at his age, all in lead actor, by the way, is going to be an impressive accomplishment.
Right. And
in him getting that 3rd nomination, especially consecutively from just last year, it's going to sort of a proving himself to his peers that he's the real deal, and that giving him an Oscar at this early age is not weird. It's sort of, it's called for, because he has a range that is not typical, and already under his belt has so much success and is already primed to be one of the big, actors of his generation. And so they would sort of mint that with, crown that with a Best Actor win. And if you look at the field, even though, again, oddly enough, that's the paradox of the Best Actor race, it's packed with contenders, but it's not packed with
potential winners.
There aren't a lot of people that you can see, oh, that's a runaway winner there. And so that really benefits Timothée Chalamet in this category. And so,
which also benefits Best Picture.
How much further can the film go besides Best Picture and Best Actor?
I mean, certainly I think screenplay, is an obvious one.
Especially because, again, if Josh Safdie misses for Best Director, he'll be recognized in the screenplay category.
That's actually the most fascinating one, right? Which is, so I'm comfortable with picture, I'm comfortable with actor, I'm comfortable with screenplay. Based on it being a Safdie movie and a sports movie, I think film editing is a good option. I think Jack Fisk, the production designer, hardly ever comes out.
He's a legend.
He never comes out and gives you something less than worthwhile and less than something you want to celebrate. And so I think he's in an excellent position.
I did find it strange that after the screening, people were saying costume design more than production design. And I know that, based on the stills that I've seen, there was a lot of recreation of the era, and it looks very impressive. And Jack Fisk is, again, a legend, Jack Fisk. So it was hard for me to think that they would opt to nominate a costume designer that they've never recognized yet, and not Jack Fisk.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the costume designer can get in with Jack Fisk.
Right.
Jack Fisk can bring the costume designer in,
Right.
as opposed to we nominated the costume designer but left out
Yeah.
the production
It doesn't
designer.
make a lot of sense to me.
Maybe we have to see the film, but again, just his reputation. Maybe some people are, drawing a parallel between how Everything Everywhere was able to get that costume nomination with a lack of competition, but I just don't see it in the cards that way. So those are 5. If you put production designer, I think casting is a really good choice here.
It's strange because we don't know how casting is going to play out this year. Obviously it's the newest category. What are they going to prioritize? We won't know that until this year when we see what the category looks like. Are they going to prioritize, films that have a very interesting, wide, diverse net of actors involved, casting decisions involved, or is it going to be a little bit more safe, conventional? We don't know. Is it going to depend on how well the casting director is known or not? And I think that's a big question mark, but certainly the film is strong in that category because, the casting in the Safdie films tends to be really unorthodox, out of the box, and very
street casting.
Exactly. And very, and a big reason why their films are so successful because of this sort of colorful casting. And that's certainly the case here. I mean, there were many, many memorable performances, supposedly from the entire film, top to bottom. Almost everyone said, well, technically, Timothée Chalamet is the anchor, and so he was at the top.
Yes.
But when we talk about the ensemble, everyone was talking about Kevin O'Leary and saying that he is by far the second best performance.
Right.
Other people were completely in love with Odessa Ezion for her performance. Other people really liked Gwyneth Paltrow. I heard Abel Ferreira has a very memorable part.
Tyler the Creator.
So, I mean, there's just a feast of really appreciated performances in the movie.
We just don't know, again, how the casting branch is going to end up voting, but I think it's a strong contender there. And then everyone talks about the music.
Right.
And I think it's a strong contender there as well.
Everyone says the music is unmissable, but I will say that we've been in that territory before where a score was so integral to the DNA of a film, and it still missed out. So everyone, I mean, the Challenger score last year was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And I thought from the very beginning of its awards prospects, I thought, no way they're going to nominate that. And then it got to this place where it felt like, it's going to actually happen.
Golden Globe.
It's going to actually happen. And then it doesn't happen.
Right.
Because it's just not what they go for.
Right.
And then I think that's still here. One of Trick's point never.
Yeah.
Is not a musician that they've embraced before. We don't know how they're going to react to the music. I heard that the music sort of has this 80s feel. So there's sort of this
anachronistic
element to the entire thing. We don't know. I don't think that that's a slam dunk. I think that, based on quality, it would seem like a slam dunk, but a snub can happen there.
Right. I mean, if you look at all those, and I listed off picture, actor, screenplay, film editing, production design, score, and casting. I think 7 is the number that I'm comfortable with right now. I haven't seen it yet.
I like 6 or 7, yeah.
I like the narrative is pointing to me to 7. Their best day would also include a nomination for Kevin O'Leary in supporting actor, Odessa Ezion for supporting actress, Gwyneth Paltrow for supporting actress, cinematography, the costume design,
director,
and finally director. And that's 6 more, right? And now we're talking about being in the 13 nomination area. I don't think that this is the film to do that because Best Picture is just too competitive. And so when The Brutalist scores 10 nominations, it's because Brady Corbet was winning Best Director at the BAFTA.
Right.
I think it's too competitive this year to have Josh Safdie anywhere near winning Best Director at the BAFTA.
Right.
Winning Best Director anywhere.
Right.
I haven't seen it yet again, so for all I know, this is the Best Picture winner.
Right.
But barring that, just between Sinners, Hamnet, one bad after another, it's going to be one hell of a fight already.
Right.
And so I'm not sure that Josh Safdie's first introduction into the Oscars is going to be a powerful enough narrative. I mean, Ryan Coogler is going to get hopefully his first directing nomination this year.
Right.
Right. And so do you really bring in Josh at the same time.
Right.
And so another thing is that Josh is a director and a writer and an editor on this.
Right.
So what are you going to nominate Josh 3 or 4 times? I think he's a producer on it too. So it's difficult for me
Back to that
imagine.
idea of going from 0 to 4.
Right. And so great. Sean Baker gets nominated for 4. He wins all 4. I'm not sure that with this competition that Josh would win any of his categories. And so I'm not sure he would be able to, he should land in all 4 of those.
He's positioned in a way right now, at least, again, it's all kind of just going off social media reviews. But right now it's positioned in a way where I can certainly see Josh winning screenplay. I think it could win Best Original Screenplay.
Over Sentimental Value?
It could. I mean, I think it's going to be competitive.
Well, I'm actually glad that I brought that up because if there's one person to kick out of director,
yes,
I would argue it's Joaquin Trier for Sentimental Value.
I would argue.
Difficult to imagine.
Right.
But maybe if, the voters are going to decide that sometimes we have writers, directors, and they can be nominated for both, like Paul Thomas Anderson. And then we have writers, directors who are really just writers, like Noah Baumbach, who don't have to be nominated for director.
Right.
If they're going to classify Joaquin as the latter, then maybe that's one reason why they're not going to rush to nominate him for director, even if he was successful with Worst Person in the World. Right. That said, because it is about the industry and about the art form to some extent, I still like his chances better than Josh's.
Right. I 100% agree. I think that film is going to, is sort of art house enough, elegant enough that it's going to speak to a lot of people. I actually think the spot that would lose out to a Josh Safdie Best Director nomination is going to be Chloe Zhao for Hamnet, which I know sounds crazy to all of you, nuts. But quite simply put, it's a move that I can totally see the director's branch doing because Chloe Zhao was just there, because she's already won, and they might feel like I want to leave a more open space for new people into the fold. PTA has never won, even though he's been nominated several times. Chloe Zhao has already won.
Twice.
Twice?
No, because she won Best Picture also.
Oh, exactly.
Yes, 2 technically.
Exactly. So, I think there's a very real possibility that if they feel that tempted to include Josh Safdie for Best Director, the person who's gonna get taken out is gonna be Chloe Zhao, which again right now seems unlikely, and that's one reason why I'm not so bullish on the Josh Safdie Best Director nomination.
And I think the one reason why we're sort of harping on this one element is because A24 gets their directors in.
Yeah.
They have inroads with this branch. And so this goes all the way back to Lenny Abrahamson getting in for Room out of nowhere. Right. And they're able to get that spot for Barry Jenkins, for the director of Minari, Greta Gerwig, Brady Corbet. Yeah. And so this is a category where they traditionally do well. Yeah. And so you'll know if Marty Supreme is possibly a bigger threat because Josh will end up here. Yeah. But my gut says that it's just too competitive for Josh to get in.
So it's the first year they don't make it.
It would be the first year that they have a Best Picture nominee among the listed films that doesn't get in for Best Director. And so, for example, Celine Song doesn't get in for Past Lives, but they had Jonathan Glazer get in.
Jonathan Glazer,
for the Zone of Interest.
Yeah.
And so technically A24 should get into this category as long as Marty Supreme is the Best Picture thing.
Yeah.
So that's the one that feels really odd. So their best day is 13. I feel like the number is 7.
Right.
If you put in Josh, that's 8.
Right. But I'll also add just really quick, before we wrap up on Marty Supreme, that I'm really curious as to what's going to happen in the supporting categories. Because in a way, the film feels so centered around Timothée Chalamet, and you have people online saying, it's the Timothy show, full stop, even though everyone is great. And then other people saying everyone is so great that it's going to contend everywhere. Other people saying, hey, get ready, Kevin O'Leary is really going to make a splash. Are we really thinking that the Academy is going to go that far? And then you get to a category like supporting actors, which has 2 contenders in Marty Supreme, which is a theme this year in the supporting actress race, with movies having several contenders in the same film. What happens? Does Odessa get in, even though she's only 25 and, you know, she doesn't have a ton of credits? Or does Gwyneth Paltrow get in after a long acting break, you know, where she's mostly focused on her lifestyle brand of Goop?
Right.
You know, our actor's going to feel like, oh, you're back after a break. I'm going to nominate you right now as soon as you're back. Something about the supporting nominations is very, confusing to me. I don't know what's going to happen yet. I do know that a Best Actor winning performance tends to have, more often than not, at least another counterpart nominated somewhere else. You know, there's a handful that haven't had it, for example, like Joaquin Phoenix and Joker. So it has happened. But the majority of the times it is a Brendan Fraser sort of scenario where a supporting player tends to also get in, you know, Will Smith, Ingenue Ellis, you know, it tends to happen. Is this going to be one of those potential best actor winners that no other actor was nominated alongside him? Or are we getting ready for a surprise nomination in the supporting categories?
I have yet to see it. I have yet to see it, but my gut impression is that this performance, the way people are talking about it, Timothy's performance, is closer to the Joaquin Phoenix performance in Joker, in the sense that it's such a quintessential part of a part of the experience. You know, possibly the experience is, you know, through his performance, that it overshadows everything else. And so I also think that there's an element about the way that the character is going to be captured from the filmmakers and Chalamet that makes it feel like a larger than life performance. And that actually, in my opinion, works against a second acting nomination. So when you have Daniel Day-Lewis, you know, basically acting everyone else out of the scene in There Will Be Blood, or Joaquin Phoenix doing the same thing in Joker, it's difficult to get those supporting performances in or noticed. I think it's the more grounded work, the more sentimental work, like Will Smith in King Richard or Brendan Fraser in The Whale, that they have that scene, usually an emotional scene, usually a scene, you know, that pulls at the heartstrings, that gets that supporting performance in. First of all, I'm not sure that Josh really wants to pull on anyone's heartstrings, number one. Number two, even if that were the case, it seems to me that the way that Timothée Chalamet is, you know, the way he's tackling the performance, he is going to overshadow his screen partner. And so I really don't think I see it that way. Again, that's just my impression based on what I've seen in the trailer, what I've heard about the performance, and again, what I see in the promotional videos.
But also
I think it's a Timothée Chalamet show. That's it,
right?
Strictly speaking.
Right, but also the cons of the individual contenders in these supporting races. Kevin O'Leary.
That doesn't help.
Odessa, Gwyneth Paltrow. You know, I'm just not sure I see a slam dunk somewhere.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. It's almost to me like what I've been seeing is the opposite of one battle after another, where again, I really do think that if you poll people on who their favorites are and who their favorite is in the film, you're going to end up more or less tied amongst all the characters. I don't think anyone's ever going to compete against the favorite of Marty Supreme. It's going to be Timothée Chalamet by 97%. You know, if you really hated his performance, then you're going to say, no, my favorite was Kevin O'Leary. You know? And so I really don't see it getting much traction there. I think the only nomination I'm unsure of is director, because technically A24 should be there. I just don't see how there's any room.
Right. Or it's going to be a big snub.
Yeah. Could be a big snub. I mean, there's also a chance someone had, you know, positioned the idea or expressed on film Twitter again that maybe this movie is a little bit more Babylon than people are letting on.
Really?
Yeah, that if you like Josh's films, Safdie films, you're going to like this film. But if you're not that nuts about it, then it may be a lesser Safdie film, or maybe a lesser film altogether. And so I will say that I was kind of surprised at the number it started at IMDb. Like it was like a 7.4, which to me is kind of low compared to all the talk I was hearing from a lot of major pundits saying that the best picture win
Right.
is more complicated now because it's not just Hamnet and Sinners and One Bad After Another. Now there's Marty Supreme too.
Right. Right.
It just doesn't seem to me like if that were the case that it should be starting at a 7.4.
Right. And and I think there's an air of, skepticism. Is this overhypeness?
Hyperbole, yeah.
Or are we, serious here?
And we've been in the room, right?
I know that, for example, one of the critics that we quite like.
Stephanie
Zacharick from Time, I believe.
It didn't seem like she enjoyed it.
Seems like she really didn't like it.
Yeah.
So we know at least it'll get one non-positive review.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so, it's hard to read right now. That's the problem when all you have to go on is social media.
Yeah.
And again, so much of social media is something premieres, it's amazing. Something else premieres, it's amazing. Something else premieres.
Honestly, exactly.
It's just pure hyperbole.
Which is part of why it's a race. You have your festival premiere, your press screening. We were in the room. We've been in the room when a film premieres, and just the energy in the room is just contagious, and the excitement is electric.
Yeah.
And it's just not the same when you hit reality. And so we were in the room in 2016 when 20th Century Women premiered.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I thought that was the best film of the year. And there's no way that A24 doesn't campaign that movie into a Best Picture nomination.
Right.
That I thought, that's picture, screenplay, actress. Annette Bening is finally going to win for 20th Century Women because it's a brilliant film. Right. How can you love movies and not love this movie, even if it's not super showy? That just doesn't happen. Right. And so like being in the room changes everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything.
Yeah. 100%.
So that's something you always have to keep in mind. But that said, just based on the fact that A24 hasn't prioritized anything else and essentially railroaded Benny.
And that Timothée Chalamet right now stands to win Best Actor.
Yeah. And I will say this, that I haven't seen it yet.
Right.
But I have seen The Secret Agent.
Right. We've both seen it, yeah.
We've both seen it. And
Wagner
I've always been on the... Even if I think that you called the win for Wagner
he's
at
phenomenal.
Cannes way faster than I did because I was a huge fan of Two Prosecutors.
Right.
But if Timothée Chalamet is going to give speeches this year, anywhere near his SAG speech, he should be very afraid of Wagner ever getting on a stage because nobody's voting for Timothée Chalamet to give me that SAG speech 3 times. I don't have to hear that again.
Well, I will say that I do think right now it's his to lose, Timothy's, but I do think his biggest competition will end up being, I know people are saying Leo DiCaprio. That's not Leo, guys.
No way.
The biggest competition you'll have is going to be Wagner Moura.
It's going to be Golden Globe comedy winner, Timothée Chalamet, who hopefully gives a better speech, versus Wagner Moura, Golden Globe drama winner, who will give an excellent speech.
Right.
And so it's, I think, a race between those two, and I'm saying that Timothée Chalamet. It's really all going to come down to Timothée Chalamet's speeches and whether he had enough media training to help make those speeches a little bit better.
I think that honestly, I see it a little differently. I think Timothée Chalamet getting nominated this soon, getting 3 nominations at this age, getting consecutive nominations after just last year playing Bob Dylan, and now we're going to nominate him for playing another character based on a real life figure. That's going to be enough for him to win. And Wagner Moura, it's his first nomination, so he'll always have that asset on his side. And honestly, it's like you say oftentimes, he's not on he's offense, defense. You say,
that's right. Benicio Toro on One Battle. Yeah, we're on offense now.
Right. So it's his to lose, Timothy's. But I do think his biggest competition, people aren't putting enough stock into this, is Wagner Moura.
I think it's gonna come down to the speech. No, like I said, if you remember when Anne Hathaway gave that speech for Rachel getting married, basically torpedoed her chances. Like, you got to come up with better speeches. You need to rewind every speech Demi Moore had last year and devise a strategy. Because, again, at some point, people are going to get tired of that speech and be like, do I have to hear that a 4th time? Even if you're double nominated, if you're nominated back to back, do I have to hear that?
I'm not sure his speeches would be about the same thing as the SAG last year. I think they'd be different.
I have no idea. I just don't, please don't. So yeah, I think that's where we're at with
Right.
Marty Supreme.
Right. And we wanted just to mention really quick is that, Halloween is coming up.
That's
and
right.
They just announced Warner Brothers, they're having an incredible year, that they're going to release Weapons on HBO Max for Halloween. And, we just want to say, to finish off this episode, watch out for Weapons, because Weapons right now, I think, is positioning itself to be a strong contender than people are anticipating. We believe firmly that Weapons will get nominated for a PGA, a Producers Guild Award.
Yeah.
We believe it will get nominated for a Writers Guild Award. And so you'll see pretty soon when the awards start coming out that Weapons will be mentioned and mentioned and mentioned. And if you look at the landscape of categories, there are many spots where Weapons tends to, land a surprise nomination. It could absolutely land a nomination in makeup. It could absolutely land a nomination in supporting actress. It could land a nomination in screenplay. And it could very well land a nomination in Best Picture.
Right.
I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but that's just the strong position that it's in.
And I also think we have, limited competition in Best Picture, where can Neon get 3 films nominated for Best Picture with The Secret Agent?
Or might it make more sense for Warner Brothers to get 3
Maybe it
films?
makes more sense for Warner Brothers to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes more sense than Netflix getting 2 in.
Yeah.
Especially since none of them, look to be huge, to stand head and shoulders above the rest of them.
Right.
And so I think we've always had this idea, even when we watched it, just the fact that it's creatively ambitious, well received by critics, well received by audiences. It made money. It was a surprise sort of sleeper hit. Just that gets it a bunch of guild nominations, as the ones you just said. But you can
maybe even a SAG ensemble.
Even a SAG ensemble is on the table. Even I would even say even an Ace Eddie Award for its editing on the drama side. That's on the table. Some of its sound work, that's on the table because of the incredible amount of success it had. The question is, can Weapons do what something like A Quiet Place failed to do in 2018, which is, despite all those nominations, still only got the sound. And that's that it even won an award for Emily Blunt and supporting actress, right?
But I will say there's an element to Weapons that is certainly still dealing in the fantasy space, certainly with, witches and witchcraft, but it also has this sort of more grounded drama happening, with its mystery and trying to decipher the mystery, where A Quiet Place has monsters, so, I know it's not a bridge too far from each other, but I think there's something to the groundedness of Weapons that makes it, I think, a little bit more easier for them to possibly consider as an actual awards contender.
I mean, I think that may be the case, but I'm not sure. I still don't know if I can separate Weapons from the, the Quiet Place, Crazy Rich Asians of it all and say that there's enough there for them to take it seriously. I don't know that that's there. But I think that as these contenders start falling by the wayside and you're running short on movies, that you're going to go and put it on again and you're going to go and revisit it, or you're finally going to give it a chance. Yeah.
And also that it did so well that there's a chance that's one movie you saw.
Right.
You saw that movie.
Right.
And so that's already an asset.
Exactly. I mean, I do think it hurts. I think stuff like this always hurts. I think if Chloe Zhao does not get nominated, I'm blaming the announcement that she's directing Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You save that until after your nomination. And the same thing where, Zach Kreger's chances for Weapons would be so much better if he had not announced that he's making Resident Evil on IMAX.
Or that,
Aunt Gladys is going to get her own movie. Like no one's, it doesn't help when you say, and we've started working on A Quiet Place Part 2. That I can tell you automatically hurts A Quiet Place Part 1.
Right.
Their bid.
Right. But certainly you heard it here first. Watch out for Weapons.
Yeah.
It stands to make a bigger splash than we all think.
And certainly I think as you're plotting whatever your 10 for Best Picture is going to be, which should come pretty close to who the PGA are going to be, there's only 9 spots left in the PGA because of Weapons will have a spot there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's everything for today's episode. We went through a lot.
A lot to catch up on.
Got Springsteen coming up soon.
Right.
Frankenstein's finally going to be viewed by more people.
We'll be
House
watching
of Dynamite.
We'll be
coming out
watching a
streaming.
lot of films in the next few days.
Got more screenings we're going to try to get through.
We have special screenings we're going to attend.
Yeah, and so so until next time, I'm Joseph, and I'm here with
Jules.
And follow us on Twitter at Academy Anon. Visit our website, framesandflicker.com. New Oscar predictions, and Lee is on there. House of Dynamite takes a hit.
Updated in all categories.
Updated in all categories. House of Dynamite takes a hit. Mario Supreme is looking good. Are we all sleeping on Frankenstein? Okay. We'll catch up with you guys next time.
And it's been a pleasure. The music on this episode, entitled Cool Cats, was graciously provided by Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0.
Disclaimer. The Academy Anonymous podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.